IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. Today, we're going to continue our State of the Union analysis of the Notre Dame program. That's Ryan Roberts. I'm Brian Driscoll. Ryan, I really enjoyed yesterday's offensive discussion because there's just so much intrigue about that unit. And it's funny, even though it was not the best unit on the team in 2022, it's odd because I feel like that unit is projecting in the right direction. And as I thought about it, and you look at the defense and you feel like, boy, it's not projecting in the right direction. And a lot of it is, let's be honest, recency bias. The offense played pretty well in the bowl game. The defense did not. Defense didn't really play well the last two games of the season. But there were still a lot of moments where the defense looked like a vintage Notre Dame defense, but too many moments, in my opinion, where it did not, Ryan. And that's where we want to kind of begin the big picture aspect of this. We'll dive into the scheme. We'll talk about the coaching staff. We'll go position by position. Then we'll do a mailbag at the end. So get those mailbag questions in. But, Ryan, when I look at this defense, I see a unit that was good. I see a unit that kept Notre Dame in every game but one this season. I see a unit that had some really good moments at times. But I also saw a unit that was wildly inconsistent for its talent level. We saw some regression from a few too many spots, in my opinion. And we saw a unit that, unlike past Notre Dame defenses, the biggest thing was when they needed to make a stop, in a lot of instances in big games, they could not make stops. It happened in Ohio State, happened against Marshall, happened against Stanford, happened against USC. For all the righteous indignation and proper indignation about how the offense played against Marshall and Stanford, and it was bad. The reality is the defense in both games had chances in the fourth quarter to make stops with a lead that could have helped win that game, and they couldn't get it done. That's not to say those losses are on the defense. It's just to say that's different than what we've seen from past defenses. And yesterday we were talking about how against Georgia in 2017 and Georgia in 2019, especially in 2019, it was the defense that made the stops at the end that gave the offense the opportunity that they couldn't capitalize. And so for me, Ryan, when I look at this defense, I see a team that took a step back despite a lot of veteran players. Mm-hmm. And my concern is that we saw regression. And so everything that happens this offseason, from Coach Freeman to Coach Golden to Coach Washington to Coach Mickens to Coach O'Leary to Coach Laurinaitis to everybody involved with the defense, all the way down to the players, everything that happens this season, this offseason, needs to be geared towards making sure that stops. Stop the slide and push forward. Again, was it a bad defense? No. But what are we talking about here? What's the standard? The standard is, did you play good enough football to compete for a championship? And the simple fact of the matter is, for large chunks of the season, the defense was good, but it wasn't good enough when that's the standard. And that's the thing that needs to get focused on and corrected, in my opinion, this offseason.
Brian, it was a little bit of a weird defense this past year for Notre Dame, wasn't it? I mean, because you mentioned like not being able to get a stop when it mattered most, which I agree with completely. But it was also, going into the year, we thought Notre Dame would have a really solid front seven, right? Front six and then a rover, right? But then the secondary was the question mark coming into the 2022 season. I feel like leaving it was almost the opposite, like the traditional Notre Dame defense, what you would expect from that type of defense is strong front four or strong front three, depending on what system they're running. I know they were a 3-4 team, obviously, in the early 2010s. But whether you're a 3-man front or a 4-man front, you expect Notre Dame to be strong up front. You expect them to be good on the second level because they have historically been that way over the last several years. And this year, I thought you took a step back on the first and second level defense, but then you took a massive step forward in the secondary, which is a little odd, right? So you were almost building from the back forward, which is much different than what you typically see from Notre Dame. So just an odd year, really, because there's talent, sure, all over the place. And we'll talk about a lot of the talent on each level. But it was just I think it was like a polar opposite of what you typically think of Notre Dame football defensively, which just makes it kind of like a weird feeling. But I think there's still optimism because there's talent there. It's just from what we expected to see in 2022 to what we saw in 2022, I think it really kind of just took me a little off guard of like, that was not what I expected. So this is going to be a big offseason for that defense, just in general, defensive staff, because there is talents. And I know that we're going to be talking about that all offseason because people are going to, from the national media perspective, be like, oh, they lack talent. No, they don't. Notre Dame does not lack talent. It's just about putting that talent in the right positions and capitalizing off what they do well. And I feel like on the front seven, Notre Dame didn't consistently do that in 2022. So it's going to be interesting to see just how that develops this offseason, obviously.
You look at the defense, Ryan, and you talk about the pass defense, and it did that without a consistent pass rush. And it did it against a schedule that was loaded with teams that are really good throwing the football. You talk about Ohio State, North Carolina, USC, BYU was good at throwing the football. Boston College couldn't do anything against Notre Dame even before the snow came, and that was coming a week after they had thrown for 300 yards against a pretty good NC State defense in a game in which they got a road win over a ranked team. And it was just one of those weird aspects of the season that you just said, man, they were really good at times, and then at other times they just they were not good. And then like their pass defense, here's a kind of talk about just the big picture of it as we'll get into the scheme. It's like, but it seemed like they couldn't stop both at the same time. They were either really good against one and vulnerable to the other, or vice versa. And I think that's something that has to change. But, I saw a defense that for the last 3 years, to me, this goes back to 2020, has not been an overly sound defense. I mean, this was an issue in 2020. I still, it wasn't just the Bama game where the secondary had trouble tackling in space, where the linebackers missed a lot of tackles. It was not just the Bama game. That was just the most prominent. We can go back to a lot of games during the season where the defense had similar issues. And so this hasn't been an overly sound defense really for 3 seasons. That's something that's got to get corrected. And that's something I thought they did a pretty good job of in the second half against South Carolina. So again, we've seen flashes of it, Ryan, but this defense just hasn't quite been the same really since 2018. And it's had some good moments. 2019 defense had some really good moments. I mean, some really good moments. And then there were some moments where it's like, boy, these guys are just bad, and just can't stop anybody. It couldn't stop the quarterback that year, which is really weird. But then you look at other times when, they did a great job against Georgia. I mean, everybody thought Notre Dame was going to get blown out by Georgia that year, and the defense played great in that game. And so you look at it, Ryan, and it's just been a weird stretch. You're coming off of you've won 3 games in a row. You did a pretty good job against a pretty good Virginia defense. Shut out Bowling Green. Do a good job against USC, and then you come out and just get destroyed by Michigan in that run game. And then they come back the next week, and the defense for the next 5-6 games is pretty good. It played really good football. It's just that weird anomaly. And then we saw that in 2020. We saw that in 2021, where second half of the year, that defense was pretty good. I mean, really good, except for the North Carolina game, which was just a poor game from a fundamental standpoint. If they could simply just tackle in that game's not close. And then we saw the Oklahoma State game, which was a very similar problem. So a lot of those things kind of this year were there as well. But the scheme also, I felt, didn't put him in position, which we'll get to in a second. So it's just a lot of different things where you look at this defense and say, they did some good things, but sometimes I ask myself, did they play well because they just have better players than most of the teams they win against? Was it scheme? Was it coaching? Was it a combination of both? When they got in trouble, was it because they didn't have the talent in those games? Was it coaching? Was it scheme? Was it a little bit of both? And I think what I came to the conclusion at the end of the year is, Ryan, it's a little bit of all of it in certain spots. And that's what we're going to discuss today. And we're going to discuss kind of what the future looks like.
Well, Brian, I mean, this is a interesting conversation. I'm sure we'll have it at some point in the show, if not right now. But does it feel like for Notre Dame a little bit to you? Because I know we've talked about, them playing maybe a more of a odd front or playing more even front, or like what their philosophy is as far as how they want to set up their defense. But sometimes for me, because you recruit, obviously, and you acquire talent to fit your scheme, right? Like the body types, the play styles, all that type of stuff. I feel like sometimes right now, Notre Dame might be between identities at times. I don't know if you agree with that or not. Like, I just feel like there's an inconsistent understanding of what do you want to be defensively, right? Do you want to be a 3-man front? Do you want to be a 4-man? Do you want to be a 4-2-5? Do you want to be a 3-3-5? I feel like there's a lack of identity sometimes, or like just kind of in between what they want to be, if that makes sense. I don't know. It's just something that I've been wrestling with because I just don't think they have the players that for what they want to be.
Let me ask you this. Let me ask you this, Ryan, to your point, because I want you to speak to that. I don't want you to move on from that just yet, because I think you hit on something really good.
Sure.
You watch a lot more NFL than I do. Isn't that kind of, from what I've watched in the NFL, isn't that kind of what you see in the NFL? Like when I remember one of the things that I liked about the Bengals defense when I studied it, because like I did study the Bengals defenses, they look like a completely different defense from week to week structurally.
They do. Yep.
And that's the nature of the NFL, right? I mean, it's you don't have just the days of like Bill Belichick just having his base defense and this is what we do and this is how we line up and we'll make some adjustments to it. I don't think you can really do that anymore in the NFL. You have to be multiple. You have to be heavy sub package. I don't think that's changed, right? I mean, since I've, in recent years. Mm-hmm. And when I do go back and watch film of the NFL games and NFL teams, and I'll do some all 22 stuff in the offseason, I just don't like watch the games and I don't like follow the seasons. I see defenses that just from week to week look completely different. And defenses that 1 week are geared to stop this thing and the next week are geared to stop that thing because there aren't very many balanced teams in the NFL right now. Is that also correct from your analysis of the NFL?
Yeah, I would think so. I think that right now defense is very multiplicative. And what I mean by that is there is, I think, one team, at least last year, that played base defense over 50% of the time, right? And base defense in the NFL is changing. I mean, usually what you think of with a sub package is what it used to be was, hey, you're a 4-3 defense. I'm going to take my Sam linebacker out. I'm going to throw my nickel in there, right? That's a nickel defense. It's easy. It's an easy replacement. But I think teams are really kind of stretching that line between 4-man front, 3-man front, and they are doing a lot more variety of things from an NFL perspective, right? It's not just a 4-3 turns into a 4-2-5 nickel. Like that's not what it is anymore. It's, hey, we're in a 4-3 look, 4-2-5 look. And against this certain team, against the Kansas City Chiefs, we're going to line up with three men on the line of scrimmage, and we're going to drop 8 a ton, right? Like we're going to do those types of things. So I think you're onto it. Honestly, I do think it's an NFL mindset that we want to have variety as a defense because it is a offensive driven league right now, right? So you want to be able to try to confuse teams. But I do think that there is something to be said about when you try to do too much defensively at times in the college game, that it can be a little bit of a overload as far as asking players to do things. So I think you're onto something. I do.
And to me, Ryan, that's kind of when I look at it, that's kind of my concern, right? I think that's the biggest thing. And as let's transition into sort of the scheme discussion of this. I think part of my issue with the defense as it stands now is, I think you nailed it. What's the foundation of this defense? Like the offense. When the offense is not good, I can point to this is why it's not good. This is what the offense does well. This is what it didn't do well in this game that it does well in other games. And I can point to, I can tell you what I believe Tommy Rees believes in offensively. After studying Al Golden for a year, I have no clue what he believes in defensively. Like really none. And that's where I kind of keep saying when I talk about the NFL, I think it could be lazy to say, well, he's an NFL coach and so he runs NFL schemes. It's not so much that because I just think that's too simplistic. Like I've seen he's the next Brian Van Gorder. Why? Because they both came from the NFL. That's absurd. Al Golden's defense was exponentially better than what you said multiplicative. So I had to kind of come up with my own big word, right? So exponentially is the one I'm going with. Better than what Brian Van Gorder did. Al Golden did a good job this season. He didn't do a bad job this year. No. But Al Washington did an okay job this year. He didn't do a bad job coaching this year. But that's not the standard. The standard isn't 9-4. The standard is playing for championships. And the defense was not a championship defense for chunks of this year. And that's kind of where we're coming from. So I think it could be at least, NFL scheme, bad. Well, no. I'm okay with some NFL philosophies coming in, especially because one of the benefits of being an NFL background is Notre Dame does face so many different types of offenses from week to week. They need to have some diversity to it. They need to be able to kind of, personnel match from week to week. You can't defend USC the same way you defend Wisconsin. Well, the old school Wisconsin.
Now you can,
right?
Yeah.
Now you can. You can't defend Ohio State the same way you defend Michigan or Georgia, and those are teams that Notre Dame's going to play. If you're trying to win a championship, next year, if you're going to win a championship, you have to play Ohio State, you have to play USC, then you got to go play Georgia. Completely different offenses. And so you've got to be built to then, and by the way, in the middle of that, you've got to play like Navy. You've got to play a MAC team, a Big 12 team, a Big 10 team, an SEC team, an ACC team, a Pac-12 team. That's just kind of what Notre Dame does. So you have to have that diversity. But within that diversity, every single coach needs to have a foundation that when things aren't going well, you say, this is what we're doing. And I don't feel like Notre Dame established that this year. And so when we talk scheme and we talk changes and all those type of things, we'll get into the specifics of the scheme in a second, Ryan. But one thing Al Golden's going to have to do this season in year number 2 is say, what is your foundation? What is your bread and butter? What are the things that you can go to no matter the opponent to say, our kids are going to be masters of this? And because sometimes you're going to come out, especially when you're going against good offensive minds, like you're going to see at Ohio State and Georgia and USC, because, hey, I hate to break it to y'all, but Ryan Day came from the NFL, right? Todd Monken came from the NFL. Bill O'Brien came from the NFL. Steve Sarkisian came from the NFL. These are guys that have that background, so you need to have some NFL influences. But in college, you still have to have a foundation of this is who we are, and when push comes to shove, and we thought we were going to get something in this game plan that we don't have, we need to be able to go to this. That's what killed them against Marshall. They had a game plan to stop Marshall that didn't work because Marshall didn't do what they thought they were going to do, and they had nothing to turn to. And so to me, when we talk about the defense improving, that right there is the biggest thing that Coach Washington and Coach Golden, I get the Owls confused, that Coach Golden and his staff, which includes Coach Washington, it includes Coach Mickens, it includes Coach O'Leary, all those guys, that's something that they're going to have to look at and say, we've got to make sure that we have a foundation. We have to have something that we believe in, that when push comes to shove, we know we can turn to. And they didn't have that this year. USC game, Ryan, when things weren't working, what could they turn to? They had nothing to turn to because they don't have a foundation. Now, they may think they do, but they don't. They didn't, at least not one that worked, in my opinion. And so that's something, Ryan, to me, that has to change. To change. And if it doesn't, then they're going to have some problems.
And I think that I do think there's a fine line as a first-year defensive coordinator where I'm going to cut a guy some slack at points, trying to understand what who the players are, right? How do they fit? What did they do well? The maturation. This offseason going into next year, there's limited excuse for that at that point, right? You now know what Riley Mills does well. You know what Xavier Watts does well. JD Bertrand, yeah. Benjamin Morrison. You know what all those guys do well. And you've also now had a recruiting class to start recruiting to what you want to do, what you want your identity to be long-term, right? So you have a much deeper understanding of what it means for you to be successful and what your team, what your defense needs to be successful. So all those things in mind, I am still optimistic and hopeful for what Al Golden could be. Because to your point, Brian, I don't want people to misunderstand this. Al Golden wasn't bad in his first year. It wasn't bad. Could it have been better? Absolutely. Does it need to get better? Absolutely.
Right.
No doubt about that. No one's arguing against that. It wasn't awful, though. It's not like he's not a clueless coach that is just kind of treading water. Like, I think Al Golden knows the game. I think he showed in spurts.
Not Brian Van Gorder.
No, exactly.
That needs to get that
Axe
needs to
that
get
one, throw it out. Yeah.
eliminated, thrown out, just stop. That's a
Yes.
silly, petty thing to say,
Yes.
right? If the 2015 team would have had this year's defense, that team would have been hard to beat.
Yep.
Right? I mean, it would have been hard to beat. Now, there would have been some teams in the playoff, but like regular season, they don't lose 4 games. Right? And that's the whole point. They weren't 9-4 this year because of the defense. That's I want to make sure we're clear on that. They were 9-4 this year because the offense wasn't good enough. But the defense also wasn't good enough to then bail out the offense the way it has in the past. And that's the difference. That's the point that we're making here.
And it needs to take a massive step forward. But I really think that with a full season, with a full offseason, with a full recruiting class, I think you're going to get a much deeper understanding this offseason of what this defense wants to be. What does Al Golden want to be? I mean, just looking at the recruiting class, and I know we're going to go through every position, but looks like there might be some more 3-man in the future. Like that's what it looks like to me, just based upon how they've been recruiting the defensive line over the past year. But I mean, we'll see what that identity is going to be. But regardless, is that I think that we saw that there needs to be a deeper understanding of what they want to be, what the identity is, and how the players can fit that identity, and how you can change a little of your identity to fit what the talent that's on the roster. Because there's also a fine line or a tugging point of this is what I want to be, but this is what I have to be right now. And we can trend towards that. We can recruit to get to that point. We can start to implement things to get to that finer destination eventually. But you still need to understand that if you're a 3-man front team, for instance, and you don't have the guys to really play it right now, like if you want to be a 3-man front, but you can't do it right now, you have to change, right? Or else you're sacrificing the present for what you want the future to be. So I think that that's the tugging point that needs to happen of you can work towards an identity, but still understand that you need to make things the best possible outcome right now to win football games.
So let's talk about the scheme, Ryan, and what it was and what it needs to become. What it was, I mean, we can look and we can define what it was, right? Like, I don't want to be lazy and be like, well, I don't know what it was. Like, I don't know what their foundation is, but I know what they did. They were kind of from a big picture standpoint. They're a team that wants to be very linebacker centric, a team that wants to play a lot of man coverage and get to that from a lot of different looks, and very multiple in how they line up, multiple how they attack, and a team that wants to stop the run, but I don't think always had a good plan to stop it. Like I do think when I break down these games, they had plans to stop the run. I just don't think those plans worked real well at times. And some of that was execution. A lot of that was execution. Then you got to look into, well, why was the execution not good? Was the players not good enough? Were they not taught well? Is the system too complex and all those type of things? And I think it's a defense that tries to have answers for everything that the offense does, which again is a very NFL-oriented thing. So I feel like that is what I can say about this team philosophically. I don't know that I can point to specific schemes and say, boy, this is just kind of the bread and butter, other than just saying you're going to get some kind of inside fires and play cover one. And, but there was really nothing that I'd say, boy, this is what they hang their hat on, other than you get in a pinch, you bring a safety fire because like maybe that'll get home and get to the quarterback or something.
And it never did. It seemed like
rarely.
It never did.
Yeah, I think you had Ramon Henderson had that one, right? Brandon Joseph had one, but outside of that, it was more often than not, it didn't work.
Exactly. Which is weird, Brian, because, I mean, you are usually influenced by your experiences, right? And we saw Cincinnati, when Al Golden was there last year, they weren't a heavy blitz team. Like their linebackers were really good coverage players. They had Logan Wilson, who was a really good coverage player, and they kind of mix and match coverages a little bit. They weren't just a strict, man-centric team. Like they threw in some like 2-zone stuff, some cover 4. Like they threw in all the type of stuff, which made them very versatile. And I guess and maybe wrongly of me, I assume that there will be some centric to that, a little bit of maybe what they had seen at Cincinnati, because obviously Al Golden's a part of that process of running that scheme and then putting in game plans and doing all that type of stuff. But I agree with you. I honestly felt like at times, because it is very linebacker centric, but defensively from a pass coverage perspective, I feel like there was a lot of times where Al Golden seemed like he didn't really trust the linebackers in coverage much, right? So it was just like auto fire, just go. We're going to try to create some mayhem, and we're going to play cover one, and we're just going to see we're going to lay our cards on the table and just live and die by the blitz at times. Like that's what it seemed like to me, right? And I'm curious, honestly, because I don't know if that's what he is or if that's what he thought he had to be with the linebackers he had, for instance, right? Like I don't know that yet. Because to your point, we can talk about, hey, 4-2-5, a little 3-man adjustment, heavy man coverage influence in the defense, a lot of linebacker fires. That's what we saw on film. But I am still wrestling with the understanding of what exactly is the actual vision you want to be. Was that based upon necessity or was that based upon belief? I'm not sure which one it was. That's what it was this past season, though. But again, this offseason is going to tell us a lot more, I think, of what Al Golden wants to be, because I'm not sure we've seen that yet. I'm not sure we have a deep understanding of what exactly he wants to be.
And to me, Ryan, I think part of it is too, is as you mentioned before, is in fairness, we also have to say, why are we giving him a pass after 1 year? Well, because not a pass. That's not a pass, because we don't do that. But like, why are we willing to say, okay, I'm going to be open-minded about year 2? Because year 1, there's so much learning involved. And everybody says, well, the players got to learn the defense and they got to learn him and what he wants. But there's a lot. I mean, if I don't know kind of how things work, I'll use an example, Ryan. I like to shoot, right?
Yes.
And the reality is I have different types of firearms that I use when I go to the range. But if I have all these things and you came with me and you didn't know how to use any of them, they're no good to you. And in this instance, dangerous. Yes. Right. And so you what do? You've got to learn and study. I spent months studying firearm safety, how to use them, how to clean them before I bought one. Right. All types of things. Right. So and then when I did finally buy a firearm, I never put ammo in it until I spent a lot of time handling it and being effective with it and efficient with it. Because, again, this isn't a toy. This is a dangerous thing. Well, you look at kind of from a football standpoint, it's very similar when you look at it from a coaching standpoint. You can't know how to use these different parts that you have if you don't know how they work. And it takes time and experience to learn how they work. You can think based on spring ball and fall camp, then you get to game days and you're like, this dude that's really good for me in practice doesn't do the things on Saturday that he did for me in practice. Okay, well, I'll give him the next week to figure it out in the next week. And then you're like, okay, this is just kind of who he is. So I think those are the things I look at, Ryan, and I say, you have to figure out a way, if you're Notre Dame and this defensive staff, to say, we are going to look at this group and say, what do we have to do to get better?
Yes.
Now, within that, I feel a lot more comfortable in knowing how to use Benjamin Morrison. I really didn't know quite what I had until September and October. I now have a better feeling of how to use Cam Hart, who I didn't really have for a big chunk of the year. Cam Hart was out in the spring, correct?
Yes.
He had because of the shoulder injury.
Correct.
And then you look at it from the standpoint of he goes into the fall, and then kind of like halfway through fall camp, he hurts his hamstring. It wasn't really till October that he really saw what he had in Cam Hart. Then you started to seeing him alter the defense to be more aggressive with Cam, and then all of a sudden Cam starts playing better, and then all of a sudden Benjamin Morrison starts playing better. Why? Because what he was doing with Cam was forcing teams into the boundary, where Benjamin Morrison was. So it took him time to know what I had with Cam Hart. Guess what? There's no issue now. If Cam Hart misses all the spring like he did this year, which he might because of the shoulder thing, guess what? He's going to know what he has in Cam Hart. He's going to know. Same thing like he's going to have a good idea of what he has with J.D. Bertrand and all the other players. So there's going to be a natural improvement in that regard. There's going to be a natural improvement because now Marist and J.D. and Jack and all these different players, Nana and Riley and Benjamin and Xavier and Ramon and Cam and all these guys, they now know him, what he wants, what his expectations are, how his defense works. So I believe there's going to be a natural progression there, but I need more than that. I need more than that natural progression, because that's going to be what it takes to be a championship defense, right? So, here's the thing too. You have to be leery of. There's two ways Al Golden can go. We put it all on you guys this year. This whole offseason is about mastering it. The other way to go about it, and I'll feel good about it, even though I don't love it, I'll feel better about it because I feel like the kids can master it now. The other thing is to then now throw a bunch more on it because now they're a year older. Because then you're just back to where you were in square one.
Yeah.
Or in year one. So if we see that, I'm going to feel really good about it. Really good about it.
Brian, I wonder if you agree with this. So I also think in college sometimes the coaches that try to overload too much, right? They try to put too many things in. They try to put too much on kids' plates. It really does sacrifice the stronger points of talent that you have. And what I mean by that is Notre Dame, and again, I think that there's a false assumption about the level of talent at Notre Dame, right? I really do. Because Benjamin Morrison left on an island is a baller, man, right? Riley Mills asked to just be a one-gap penetration style player could be a baller. Like, there's no doubt. We've seen it. Xavier Watts.
If you looked at him, Ryan, when you first showed up on campus, you'd have thought he was something different, right?
Yes. Yep. You would have had a preconceived notion that he was a two-gapping, long type of guy. Yeah, you're not wrong with that. You're not wrong. I just think that there is an overcomplication at times with Notre Dame because Notre Dame has a lot of talent, man. Like, you didn't have to do all – like, you didn't have – like, Isaiah Foskey, for instance, right? Like, let's use him for a second. Isaiah Foskey, for me, is a guy that you just say, Isaiah, go that way, brother, and go as aggressively and as quick as you possibly can because you are explosive and you are long. I don't need to drop you into coverage a ton. I don't need to ask you to read and react at the line of scrimmage to make a play, two gapping. I don't need to do those things, right? You need to play looser. That's why I think Marcus Freeman has been a very successful defensive coordinator on the college level because when he was at Cincinnati, he asked those dudes to go, man. Just go. Like Myjai Sanders, just go. The defensive lineman that is a just one gap style guy, just go, man. Sauce Gardner, play man coverage, brother. That's all you need to do. Like, you're good there, right? And I think that there needs to be a simplistic kind of approach. I don't want to call it simplistic, but more of a, I want to call it reserved either. There just needs to be a more definite understanding of what the expectation is for a football player, man. I don't want them to have to think too much on a snap-to-snap basis and ask a guy to do too much when they're really good at one or two things. Like, I think that's when you saw Notre Dame at its best defensively this year, like Maris Loifau, for instance, right? When Maris was asked to do one simple thing, to do one or two things in a role, I thought he played pretty dang well. But when he was asked to do too much, then he looked like a fish out of water. He just didn't look comfortable. And I think that there was a sacrifice at times. And again, because you're still trying to figure out what all your guys were, the system was bigger than the players in year one, in my opinion, right? There needs to be a more definite understanding of Riley can do this. Benjamin Morrison can do that. Xavier Watts is good in this role. J.D. Bertrand is good at doing one or two of those things. And as he develops a deeper understanding for that, I hope that you're going to take a massive step forward for the defensive side of the football because if Al Golden is as smart as I think he is, and I do think he's a really smart football guy.
That's not a question.
Yeah.
Right? He's a very smart football guy.
Yep. And then he'll be able to look at everything, deduce what we need to do to be the most successful, and a year of maturation and implementation of what that role is. I think that Notre Dame has a chance to take a massive step forward. Obviously, we need to see it. But I really do think that there is a overcomplication that happens, not only in Notre Dame sometimes. I think just from college football perspective, there's some defensive coordinators that come in and they just want to do too many things. You want to put too much stuff in, everything in the kitchen sink. When in reality, you play this scheme, you play it well, and it's not hard, man. It's not rocket science. If you're good at X, Y, and Z, don't try to do A, B, and C. Just stick to X, Y, and Z, and then expand upon it as your players get more comfortable in their role.
I think the big thing for me, Ryan, when I look at the scheme for Notre Dame is honestly, I'll be straight about how I feel about defense. I don't really care what you do. And there's this notion of people who are anti-335, pro-335, anti-425, pro-425, pro-3-4, anti-3-4. And I think there's too much of that. You're arguing about your personal preference, not what does or doesn't work. right? And there's a lot of things that didn't work until somebody was good at it and made it work. Right. There was a time. So you can't win throwing the ball. Remember, this was you're too young for this, but there was this not what, you can't win a championship the way Steve Spurrier plays football. You can't, you got to be able to run the football. You got to be physical. Then he went out and won a championship, and now look at the SEC. You got a bunch of 4,000-yard passing quarterbacks in the SEC now, right? And it didn't work until somebody said it was going to work. You can't win in college football running that spread offense and stuff like that until Urban Meyer went out and won a championship with it. Right. And now it's all over the place. So there's always been resistance to certain things because they were different and there was no proven track record of it. But as I've followed college football in my 44 years, I have seen a lot of things come and go. And so to me, I don't care if they want to be a 3-3-5 out of 3-3-5 personnel or a 3-3-5 out of 3-4 personnel or a 4-2-5 out of whatever. I don't care. Pick what you believe in. Be multiple within that because you have to be that at Notre Dame. Coach the heck out of fundamentals and make sure that whatever it is you believe, that your kids can play it hard, fast, and fundamentally sound. And so at this point in time, I pushed back against the 3-3-5 at Notre Dame last year because the personnel didn't fit it. You had Isaiah Foskey trying to roam around and be the third linebacker. It didn't work. Al Golden, later in the year, Marcus Freeman stopped doing that as much. This year, Al Golden said, okay, we now have film of him trying to do that. He can't do that. Okay, so now the personnel is going to look different. You don't have someone on your team now that can do what Isaiah Foskey did. So guess what? Don't ask Jordan Patelho to do what Isaiah Foskey did. And I'll tell you what, it was just one game. They didn't do that in the Gator Bowl. They didn't ask Jordan Patelho to be Isaiah Foskey in the Gator Bowl. They moved him around. They did some different things with him. They dropped him in coverage. They did some different things with him in that game, and they didn't ask him to be Isaiah Foskey. Smart. That's a plus. But in some other ways, you're like, but why are you putting Jalen Snead in that position? So those are the things that can be a little bit frustrating at times. But I don't care if they want to be a 4-2-5 or a 3-3-5 out of whatever personnel. That doesn't matter to me. They need sound scheme. They need a foundation of what they believe in. They need to be able to be an aggressive, gap sound defense, right? And whatever they do out of that, I actually think this is a team that can be very good in man coverage. They haven't had many teams like that in the past. The 2018 team wasn't like that because you had one guy that could play man coverage in 2018. That's it. One. Troy Pride. That's it. 2019, you had one guy. That was it. On the outside. That was it. And that was Troy Pride. 2020, you had nobody. 2021, Cam Hart, to a degree, but he was still learning the position in a lot of ways. Now, as you've recruited to that system, you have a lot of guys that can play man coverage. Chance Tucker, I think, can play man coverage. The incoming freshmen, I think both can play man coverage. Christian Gray and Micah Bell. Tariq Bracy got much better at it, ended up being pretty good at man coverage. Cam Hart's turned out to be a pretty good field guy, even when asked to play in man coverage. He's still got to get a little better about that. Benjamin Morrison's great in man coverage. Jaden Mickey was up and down, but has the tools to be good at it. So you have the personnel to do that, then do it. But if you don't. And that's my big thing, right? Is you don't have you have to look at your personnel and say, okay, this is what we're going to do, but we have to have certain principles. And the coverage structure you run is not a principle that I care about. Have something that fits what your guys do and make sure they execute it well and have a good plan on how to stop teams within that structure. There's great zone teams. Georgia doesn't play a ton of man. They didn't in the championship game. They played a lot of zone, and it jacked TCU up. Why? Not because zone is the best thing ever in college football. It's because they're really good at it, and because they had other parts of their team that limited their mistakes. Because I was debating with somebody, there's this notion of, you only needed 8 points to win a championship game. And my counter to that is, no, you needed 66. Because Georgia was scoring 65. TCU needed 66, right? But if you look at that game and say, well, Georgia just played elite defense. Not really. They played elite up front. Their back end actually didn't play that well in a lot of instances. Their linebackers did a great job getting up underneath routes and stuff like that. They did a good job. But there was at least 3 plays, in my opinion, that should have been huge plays for TCU where the guy was wide open and they missed it 2 of the 3 times. One time they hit it, easy touchdown. The other 2 times they missed it, including in the first half. You hit those 2 balls, One of them was 17-7. You know the play I'm talking about. It was the third down. And we had Quentin Johnson was on the right side in the slot. He runs a post route. They ran route concepts to get both of the backside guys to squat. The safety to the field was smoked. If you throw that ball the way that Tyler Buckner threw the ball against South Carolina, it's 17-14, just like that. Who knows how the game goes after that, right? I've said this about the Miami game. Yeah, it's 41-8. I don't know how that game turns out if Equanimeous St. Brown gets an accurate ball thrown to him on that first drive on the post route. Because that's how football is. When you fall behind the way that TCU did, because the other team is scoring at will, you can't keep doing your game plan. You have to get out of your game plan. Everything that you've practiced all week, you've got to get out of. And that's going to make you less effective. And so to me, this defense has to be able to find out what they're good at personnel-wise, be sound with it, be gap conscious. Because one of the big structural problems that I had at times this year, Ryan, now I don't know if this was by design or by execution. That's the thing you got to be careful of. There were far too many times where they were not gap sound. Either a cutback lane was open or the backside was open, but there was way too many times where you're just like, everybody that's doing something is doing it well, but there's just nobody there in that gap, and they just ripped you for it. So somebody, I think, made a mistake unless you were kind of betting, hey, we think we're going to overload them here and make a play. Yeah. Right? So those are the things to me, Ryan, that I look at and say, until those things get better, this defense is going to have a hard time getting a whole lot better. And to me, that's one of those things where I don't care what you do schematically, but you have to be sound at it, and you have to be aggressive with it. And I don't think they were aggressive enough this year on all levels. I think they were aggressive on the second and the third level. They were not aggressive up front. This team has to be aggressive. You're not big enough to be a team that comes out and plays the way that Notre Dame did this year, in my opinion, with your front. Mm-hmm. You're not big enough. You're not powerful enough to do that. You have athletic kids. Yes, they're not playing like Georgia, but there's some principles there in certain instances. You are an athletic front seven that's not real big right now. If you want to get big, go recruit big. But you're not there right now.
No.
So coach to that, scheme to that. And we didn't see enough of that, in my opinion, in 2022. And that needs to change.
And I thought we were going to see a lot of that because, I mean, again, Al Golden comes in. It's not going to look the same of what Marcus Freeman wanted to do, right? But I really thought that Marcus Freeman, when he was at his best at Cincinnati, right? Like that team was an attack style one gap system, right? And I thought that's where Notre Dame was heading. And then, Al Golden is doing a little bit something different, which isn't a right way or a wrong way. It just wasn't my expectation for what the defense was going to look like. So whatever this team is, I agree with you. It needs to be a deep understanding of what they are and why they are that way, right? And I feel like there was just a inconsistency in year one from – I really do think that some players were just going through the motions at times as far as their understanding because they didn't 100% understand exactly what they were supposed to do, what their role in the defense was. And more importantly than what your role is why is it your role, right? What is the end result that you're trying to get to? Because we always talk about being process-driven, right? The process to get to a certain spot. But if you don't understand why you're doing the things you're doing to get to that process, it doesn't matter, right? To get to that end goal. End goal is winning a championship, but the defensive situation, right? Like, why do you want to get what do you need to do in order to get that ultimate goal? I think that Notre Dame really needs to develop a deeper understanding of where they want to be, who they want to be, and how they need to get there. And I question at times in year one what was the developmental understanding of where you want to go? Because I just think that there was not too many voices in the room, but I think that there was an inconsistent as far as what the approach was and why you were trying to get there.
Let's transition into the coaching staff, Ryan, because we spent a lot of time on that stuff, and I think it was a good conversation to have. Let's talk about the coaching staff because this is another area that's a bit of a question mark for me moving forward. And we'll kind of do the coordinator last like we did this time, and let's start up front. And when I look at it, Ryan, I see the defensive line and I see a situation where we saw this group take a step back. I thought Isaiah Foskey regressed, not incredibly so, but just regressed. I mean, he still had 14 tackles for loss, 11 sacks, but he wasn't the same impact player. There were some gimme sacks in there.
Sure.
But there were times when we saw flat. I mean, USC had some big. I mean, he played his butt off in USC. I mean, he played so hard against USC. He had some. I thought he struggled early against Cal, and then came back with a big sack late in that game to help him put the game away. Had a big fourth down sack in that game, if you remember that one, where he is just reached out and kind of just grabbed the guy and brought him down. Just really a heck of a play. Just wasn't as good and didn't progress the way that I thought he should have. I thought Jason Adamiola regressed a little bit. I thought Justin Adamiola regressed a little bit. I didn't think Riley Mills took the step that he should have taken, partly because of I don't think he was used correctly. And there just were a lot of times to me where I just looked at this D-line and I was like, what are they doing? Like, what? I don't understand what they're trying to do with this group. I don't understand where they're using this group that way. And I think that's why Chris Smith was so effective this year when he played, because he did fit that system. But that's like your fourth or fifth defensive tackle, and you're running a system that fits him and not the others. Right. And so when I look at it, Ryan, I think the biggest thing for me is the defensive line struggled a lot this year. I think it's easy to put all of that on the feet of Al Washington. I think it's an easy thing to do because he's the position coach. And to a degree, he does deserve some of that responsibility. But number one, I don't think the scheme was designed in a way that really allowed the defensive line to attack, number one. And number two, I don't think that there was the buy-in from a player standpoint that needed to be with some of the veterans. I'll just leave it at that. And that's natural when you have situations where they played for a successful coach, a guy they liked, the guy that really cared about them, and you got a new guy coming in who doesn't have the same investment in players from a time standpoint, doesn't do the things with them the way that the previous guy did. That's not worse or better or anything. It's just different. Now, I would like to see that be more, and I would love to see that be the standard for every defensive line coach. Is okay, yeah, you got to coach great, but man, I need these players of your house as much as That's just what I want. Coaches that want to be that way. But if Al Washington is or isn't that way, it's not the point. The point is, there's always going to be, when you replace someone who had success, there's always going to be some, well, so and so did it this way. And that's just the reality of it. Well, a lot of those guys are gone now. Right. Isaiah Foskey's gone. Jacob Lacey's gone. The Adamiolas are gone. Here's a guy that was a veteran who had no prior relationship with Al Washington or Mike Elston, Chris Smith. And Chris Smith was much better this year than I thought he was going to be, to be honest with you, Ryan. And so you look at some of that and you say, by the end of the year, Jordan Patel has really taken off. That's a guy that didn't really play a lot for Mike Elston. He was a linebacker last year. So I think that we need to be because he's doing a really poor job recruiting, and I fully believe that he's doing a very poor job recruiting, in my opinion, and that needs to change big time. I don't think he did a great job coaching this year. I don't even know if I'd say necessarily did a good job. I think that he didn't do a great job, but not all of that to me is on him necessarily. I think that there needs to be some schematic change that allow these players to play to their skill set more. You can't fault the position coach for that. That's a coordinator issue.
Right.
But I also think that we need to see him do a better job of getting his players to play with a little bit more force. I thought one thing Elson was really good about was getting his players to play with force. And I don't think this D-line did that as much. And even within the scheme, there was a need for that, and we didn't see that. And that's an area, to me, where Al Washington has to really improve this offseason as a position coach. The recruiting we could do a whole show on that. We probably should soon.
We probably will.
That's something we've discussed. I don't want to spend a lot of time on that right now. That's got to get a lot better. But I think that for me, I need to see him kind of get this group to play with a little bit more, just really get after it and find a way to really push these guys. You do that and you work a little bit more on block destruction, which wasn't bad, but just not where it needs to be. Mm-hmm. I think this defensive line will be okay if used properly. But he can't really be the one that fixes the used properly thing. That's on the coordinator. Just like I can't blame Harry Hiestand if his offensive linemen can't run duo physically, but they're running duo all the time. That's not the case. I'm just using an example. That's not on the position coach. That's on the coordinator. This is the example on defense. That's on the coordinator to get that fixed, Ryan. But he has to do a better job. And you're not going to have some of those veterans are gone. He's going to now be in year 2. He has to take charge of that room a little bit more, in my opinion, and invest a little bit more in the players, in my opinion, and then get them to play a little bit that way. Because what some coaches just never understand, and I'll never get why they don't get this. When kids believe that you really truly care about them beyond just football players, and you really have their back in life, and you make them part of your family, they will run through a wall for you. They will do whatever they have to do for you because they care about you and because they think you care about them, because have you ever heard a story of an NFL player that came from nothing, that didn't involve, but this one coach at this level believed in me and pushed me and got me to realize that I can be this
all the time? Yeah.
And there was not enough of that in some of the new hires. And I think that's something that Coach Washington needs to adapt to and adjust, which is, it takes time. That's not how Elston was with the players early on. There was some beef with some of the guys that grew to love Elston, didn't like him at first. It takes time for that relationship to evolve. So this isn't even necessarily a criticism about Washington, just now that you're in year 2, this part needs to become more of a priority. Last year, you were swimming, man. You just got here. You got to hit the recruiting. You've got to do all this. I get all that. But now you're in year 2. You've kind of got an idea of who they are and what you're doing in the lay of the land. You've got nothing to do for the next 2 months except recruit your butt off and work your butt off to build a relationship with these kids. You can't coach them right now. So build the relationship. Have them over. Do all those kind of things to let them know, hey, man, you know what? I give a rip about you guys. Let's bond. Come meet my wife. Come meet my kids, right? Let's do this thing together. I think he'll find a great reward for that and how they go about their business in the spring and in the fall. And then the next part is just now go do the things you need to do to get them to play better.
And I think that there is a lot of pressure on Al Washington, and there should be at this point, right? I mean, we've talked about the recruiting woes, but I mean, also, Brian, he was in a decent situation going into last year in the sense that he had Isaiah Foskey, who is the all-time leading sacker in Notre Dame history. And now he had Jason Adamalola coming back. He had Howard Cross coming back, who had played a decent amount of football for you. He had Riley Mills coming back, who's a very talented football player. He had some known commodities coming back. Now we're looking at a 2023 unit that, again, talent for sure, but there's less known commodities, right? Like Jordan Botelho maybe could be a breakout star. Joshua Burnham could maybe play at a high level. You look at, Howard Cross can maybe take a next step. Maybe, there's still talent there, but there's not easy answers this season as there was last season. There were known commodities. There were easy answers. This is going to be a big test for Al Washington this offseason as well, because you're going to see how good of a coach are you, man? Well, we have mixed results in year 1. Now that you're building guys literally up from the start of maturation, how good do you make this unit? Is Jordan Botelho a breakout star? Well, I would give Al Washington a lot of credit if he develops into that guy, right? Is Gabriel Rubio more of an every down nose this season compared to last season? I would give Al Washington credit for that. Does Riley Mills take the step from good football player, solid to good football player in 2021 to 2022, to a really good football player in 2023? There's opportunity in front of him for Al Washington. He can change the narrative very quickly because there are a lot of question marks in this group. Again, not question marks because of lack of talent, question marks because you haven't seen it. This is about actualizing talent into production. Can Al do that? I hope so, because I do think that it's a talented group. I still have high hopes for Riley Mills. I still have high hopes for a lot of guys that are in that room because they're talented. Joshua Burnham, there's a lot of talent in that room. Year 2 under Al Washington, you need to see a lot of those guys take massive step forward, because right now with what the recruiting is, guy needs to be a good coach, right? Like he needs to be a good coach to make up for the shortcomings on the recruiting trail as they are. You need both in order for it to be a championship level team. but you need to really answer that call. And I think that they have the talent to do so. But, is it a championship level defensive line right now? No, it's not. Can it get there? Possibly, but there's a lot of questions that need to be answered, obviously.
Let's do something a little different today, Ryan.
Yeah.
To show us. Yesterday, we kind of went position by position, coaching wise. Then we talked about the position groups. Today, I kind of want to mix it up a little bit, and I want to maybe talk about them together. I think that might make a little bit more sense and be a little bit more flow, because I think in Al Washington's case, this kind of fits together, because the thing about the Notre Dame defensive line is it's never been in 2018 and 2019 and 2020. It's never been the kind of elite line from a pure talent standpoint that you've seen in past years at Bama or Georgia last year, for example, where you've got a bunch of first-round draft picks. I mean, in 2018, they had one first-round draft pick, and I would argue that he shouldn't have been a first-round draft pick in Jerry Tillery.
I think, unfortunately, the Los Angeles Chargers would agree with you on that.
He was probably more of a third-round guy to me, and now he had first-round talent, but that's never been the issue for Jerry Tillery. The thing for me, Ryan, is when I look at it, it's been really good, but they played like an elite group because you were really good everywhere. And when I look at this unit, I feel like this unit doesn't necessarily have the elite talent that other teams have. I don't know of anyone that I would look at on the current defensive line that I view as a first-round draft pick. I just don't. There are NFL talent there. I mean, how many times, for all the talk about Riley Mills and he did this or that or the other thing, I think he played better than his production. I don't think he was used correctly all the time. But how many times have you been reached out to by your sources in the NFL and the scouting world and the management and all this other type, agent world and all this, about who's this 99 kid at Notre Dame?
I had at least 5 or 6 agents this past season ask me who 99 is. And that's without even seeing him play, right? Because you understand that he's an impressive young man from a physical perspective. Like he's long and athletic. Like it's easy,
So there's talent there to work with.
Yes.
There's talent with Jordan Botelho, Josh Burnham, Howard Cross, Gabriel Rubio, Aiden Canaana, if he can get healthy, Jason Onye. There's all these different types of players. You got the incoming fresh, you got Tyson Ford, Aiden Gobira. There's talent there. But the reason it's very important that Coach Washington really do a great job coaching is because this is the group that the talent is really good. It's got top 10 to 15 type talent easily. But to get them to play like an elite group, they can't just rely on God-given ability. Okay. They have to be coached very well. And that's the thing that I felt about some of those past defensive lines is they were coached very well as having pretty good talent. So to me, that's something that makes it important because I do think the defensive line, like Mike Elston gets a lot of credit as a recruiter and by some people, I think Mike Elston's recruiting at times was very good and at times was inconsistent. And there was too many years with him and in past years where they'd get 1 or 2 really good players, but they'd always come up short in numbers. And then they would miss on inside guys. Did a pretty good job for a while there on edge players, but came up short on inside guys. And so I don't feel like the roster's where it needs to be completely on the defensive line. It's good enough that if you run it correctly and you scheme it correctly, and that's something too that you have to think about when you're looking at Al Golden's defense. This isn't a defensive line that you can just turn loose in the same way that Georgia could with its 2021 defensive line. It should have been used better. It was better than it turned out to be. It should have been better than it turned out to be. But it's not one where it's like Jason Adamiola, I think, is a talented player, but he's not a guy that I ever viewed as like, boy, this is a top 25 NFL draft pick kind of guy.
Sure.
And so, Foskey was, but Myron Tagovailoa wasn't that way. Kurt Hinish wasn't that way. Nana's not that way. Howard Cross isn't that way. But it's a lot of really good players. Mm-hmm. And so it's why it's so imperative to coach them up at a high level. Because you need to maximize the talent they have. If you can maximize the talent they have, then this group can be really good. It can be a championship caliber unit, in my view. There's no doubt in my mind. Because there's 2 ways to be elite. One is to have just a couple elite players that can just take games over. The other is to have a bunch of really good players that play the game the right way and are put in position to be successful. That's really more where Notre Dame needs to be. And so that's why it's imperative they have a defensive line coach that's a top-notch coach. Because the one thing I'll say about Mike Elston is, even though I think his recruiting was inconsistent, he was good at finding some of the sleeper kids, right, which is fine. But he didn't get a lot of the big names either, if we're going to be honest about it. Now, the difference is now you've got a head coach that will fight for those guys. You've got a recruiting coordinator who will fight for those guys. And so there's not the excuse that you had then. Sometimes, I mean, I knew Mike Elston. There was a lot of times where he would honestly get into situations, Ryan, where he's like, why recruit that kid? I can't get him if by myself. I can't get this kid out of the Southeast or out of Texas by myself. My head coach isn't helping me. And he wouldn't say this, but you could just kind of read between the lines. The defensive coordinator is not really helping me. Okay, let me just go find some sleeper kid because I know I'm not getting this kid by myself. And that's true. That's 100% true. It needs to be a group effort. Well, that's why in Mike Elston's first short tenure at Notre Dame under Marcus Freeman as the defensive coordinator, they got Keon Keeley, they got Tyson Ford, they got Aiden Gobira, they got Brendan Vernon. They were leading for Jason Moore because it wasn't a one-man show anymore. And so that's where he's got to do a better job as a recruiter. But as a coach, the reality is right now, they don't have that kind of talent. However, I do think the freshman and incoming freshman classes is going to give this team a huge boost in talent. The question for 2023, however, Ryan, is will it be ready early enough? And that I don't know. But as part of this discussion of the state of the program is looking into the future. And when I look at a defensive line that's going to have cats that like Josh Burnham, Aiden Gobira, Tyson Ford, Donovan Heinisch, Boubacar Traore, Brennan Vernon, Armel Mukam, and Devin Houston, you're working towards something, right? Yes. You've got a couple tweaks here and there, but you're working towards something. You've got length, you've got athleticism, you've got power, you've got size, you've got all the things that your older guys are kind of missing. Mm-hmm. And so the future's bright. The question is how quickly can those guys get ready, which once again adds to the need to have a top-notch position coach there.
Right.
And that's what Coach Washington has to prove himself to be. He's going to get another crack at that as far as I know. So you've learned your players. You've learned Notre Dame. You know Al Golden's system a little better now. Now it's time to take your coaching to the next level. And that's the reason why I'm saying, hey, as a coach, I'm willing to give him a year to prove himself. Let's see what you can do. Because as a coach, it's hard to walk into a place right away and do a great job. It even took Harry Hiestand 4 games to get to that point. And he's a legend who's been coaching as long as Al Washington's been alive, right? So, and he was working with some dudes, right? I mean, he was working with there might not be a position group on the roster that has more talent than the offensive line had in 2022, in my opinion. It's debatable, but that's my opinion.
No, it's fair.
And it took him 4 games to really get that group going. When you're learning new players, it takes some time to learn them and for them to learn you.
Sure.
And so now going into year 2, there's a much better opportunity for Coach Washington to learn them. And there's going to be more guys playing that have as much time with him as they had with Elston. And that's going to be an important part too. So It's a big year for Al Washington and the defensive line.
It really is, because you're going to be dependent on a decent amount of younger players and unproven products like you are. I mean, that was the fault with the 2023 group that we talked about. It's like people act like the 4-man class that Notre Dame signed in 2023 isn't like super talented. And I'm just like, guys, no, it is. It is super talented. It's just not ready-made to come in day one and probably impact the game, right? I mean, if you get Boubacar Traore, Armel Mukam, and those dudes to their ceiling, then you got some guys, right? Like you got some dudes. But the big loss with Keon Keeley is the fact that you don't have a guy that day one can just be that guy. Right. You know it for a fact.
And Jason Moore.
And Jason
Moore's playing a ton of snaps this year for Notre Dame. If
yes.
He came to Notre Dame.
Yep. And you just don't know.
I don't think he realized that, though. Like, yes. Ohio State did a great job of selling the depth chart in front of him and in the class at Notre Dame compared to Ohio State.
Even though they still have JT and Jack Sawyer coming back.
Right. I mean, but that's what they sold. That's what worked for him. That's the
Wow.
message that worked for him, and Notre Dame didn't counter that. And that's the issue when you talk about from a recruiting standpoint, right? I say, well, this is a really good defensive line class. It is, but it is missing that ready-made player. The reason that – so well, how can you criticize Al Washington if you're saying this is a really good D-line class? Because he wasn't responsible for half of that class. And the two guys he was responsible for, to be honest with you, were pretty easy. I mean, if we're being honest with you, and one of them, he wasn't even the lead recruiter for. Chad Bowden was. Chad Bowden was the primary recruiter for Armel Mukam.
Yes.
Flat out was. Yep. I still to this day don't know if Armel Mukam's brought up Al Washington's name in an interview with us. Maybe once. He talks about Coach Freeman and Chad, right?
Maybe if I had led the conversation to how's the relationship with Al Washington,
but you shouldn't have to do that, right? Exactly. You ask him if you ask him a general question about the staff, it immediately goes to Coach Freeman and Chad. That's where it goes to,
no doubt.
And with Boubacar, it's like you flipped him from Boston College, bro. Like that shouldn't be that hard. You already had
a Northeast kid that you flipped from Boston.
Kind of got Devin Houston, but Notre Dame led for Devin Houston when he got here. You know, and that was a kind of, like I said, if you can't sell Notre Dame to Devin Houston, I don't know what the problem is here. Like, I don't know what we're doing here. And then, of course, Brendan Vernon was already committed to Notre Dame when he got hired. He whiffs on Keon. He whiffs on Jason Moore. You know, you whiff on Braden Fisk. I still am upset about that one.
Yeah,
that should have been like hand ready made. So like the recruiting part's not been good. But if you look at the defensive line and you forget how it was constructed and just look at the four players, it's a good group.
Yes,
it's a really talented group. And some of them you may need to play early. But again, if you're going to need to here's the thing, Ryan. Those guys are not walking the door ready to dominate day one like Keon Keeley was. Like Brendan Vernon you saw down there, right? Physically, he's outstanding.
Yes.
But he doesn't know how to play the game yet. And he'll admit that to you.
Yeah, he will.
He'll admit that to you.
Yep.
So that's why it's imperative. I go back to it. It's imperative that you coach them at a high level.
Yes.
Here's one thing that's going to be really good for the defensive line and Al Washington. You're going to have Harry Heastand's group punching you in the face every single day you're out there. It's going to, at some point in time, Ryan, it becomes, fight or flight. You know what I mean? Like
sink or swim, baby.
Yes. Yep. It's like, bro, figure it out. Figure it out because you're getting your butt kicked every day. We saw this in 2017. Notre Dame's defensive line in spring ball of 2017 and in the fall camp of 2017, I'm like, they're going to give up 300 rushing yards a game. I'm serious. I felt because like they were just, they would get blown 4 or 5 yards off the ball. There'd be these huge, Josh Adams in every practice ripped off a 50-plus yard touchdown in every game. You're like, this defense sucks. They're going to be terrible. And I remember having a conversation with the Notre Dame coaching staff, and they're like, no, we're not that bad. They're just that good. But it's good for us to get our butts kicked like this because once they got out to Saturdays, guess what? In week 2 against Georgia, they weren't afraid of Georgia. Georgia had that one long jet sweep to DeAndre Swift. Remember that play?
Yes.
That's like they didn't run the ball that well in that game. They didn't run the ball that well at all. That jet sweep that got outside the line where there was a bad run fit by Asmar Bilal was all they did. It's all they could really get going in that game with any kind of consistency.
You almost blamed Armel Mukam on it.
I did. Asmar Bilal.
He's not even here yet, man.
It's like, dude, I was in the 5th grade by Asmar Bilal. And that's kind of wild to think about, though. He was in middle school when that game got played. That's just how wild this whole thing is.
Silly, yeah.
But, why? Because they went against that group every day. So Georgia's offensive line was really good. You had Andrew Thomas. You had some really good players in that group. The left tackle was who was the kid that got drafted by the Patriots in the first round?
Isaiah Wynn.
They had him on that line, I believe, as well. It was a really good offensive line. But Notre Dame was able to battle with it because why? Because they had been going against Quentin Nelson and Mike McGlinchey and Alex Bars and Sam Mustipher and Tommy Kramer and Robert Hainsey every day in practice.
That'll do it.
And it'll get you ready. And that's something that's going to help this defensive line a ton. And it's going to expose you as a coach and force you, I don't care how good you are, it's going to expose you as a coach and force you to say, hey, I need to up my game. And I've heard some things in the behind the scenes about Al Washington and his view of Harry Heastan that gives me some optimism that he knows he knows the resource that is there.
Nice.
I've been told he's gone to Coach Heastan at times and said, hey, what could we do that could give you some problems? What are some things that we're not doing a good job of? That's awesome. I love hearing that. Because, like, if you're a receivers coach and you really want to get better, don't just talk to other receivers coaches. Talk to DB coaches. What gives you guys problems? When you watch our film, what did you see from us that made you concerned or not concerned, or we didn't take advantage of. And that's a really great learning tool. And so having heard that in the past about Al Washington is a positive thing. There was something about Harry Heaston on Twitter or something a week or so ago in the last week, and Al Washington replies like, "Go." Now that guy tweets a lot, and and so I get that, like, he tweets a lot, but like I've heard that he views things that way. So I think that's going to be a positive. I think that's going to make him say, "Hey man, I got to up my game because this guy is going to destroy me in spring practice." And with the buzz around me right now, I can't afford that. I can't afford to go out and have my guys get embarrassed in spring practice, And so I think that is one thing that gives me a little bit of confidence, or I'll say confidence, cautious optimism.
Yeah.
Heading into the offseason when it comes to whether or not Al Washington will do what it takes to improve that side of the ball on defense.
I agree, because I think that, man, if you need Joshua Burnham and some of the young freshmen to step up, right, and to really take that next day forward, it's nothing like getting your butt kicked by Joe Alt and Blake Fisher every day.
Yes.
To really start that baptism by fire, right? Like that's it. So you always hear the guys too, right? Like it's a little bit of a cliche, but they always say like iron sharpens iron, right? But it is true. It's 100% true. If I'm playing against a offensive lineman like Blake Fisher and Joe Alt every day, like I need to understand that, like, hey man, what I'm doing is not working. I need to add something to the arsenal, right? There needs to be something. There needs to be some more effort in setting the edge. Like whatever it is, there needs to be nuance to figure out how to counteract how good that player is. So I do think that that's optimistic for Notre Dame to, honestly, I want the defense line to get their butts kicked a little bit in the spring. I do, because I want to see them come out on the other side.
How do you handle
stronger? Exactly.
How do you handle it?
How do you handle it? Because that is adversity, right? Like if I'm Joshua Burnham, and I'm just using him as an example, I'm not saying this happened to him, right? But if he's going in every single day and Blake Fisher's just blowing him off the ball and just moving him with ease and just pass sets, just isn't able to counteract that size and that length, then that's what I want to see, though, early on, because Blake's played a lot of football. Joshua hasn't played a lot of
if
football.
Josh Burnham's out there in March and April just kicking Blake Fisher's butt,
I'm like, that's an All-American next
year. I'm going to be excited,
right?
but I'm also going to be like, is Blake okay?
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Because like it just should happen, right?
Exactly.
To your point. But yeah, please continue.
Yeah, no, that's basically it, man. Like I want to see those struggles early, but I want to see improvement each and every day, right? Another cliche that everyone says now, 1% better every day. Absolutely true, though. It is absolutely true. I want to see a guy improve just a little bit each and every day. It's not about having one massive improvement and then you just go flatline, right? Like this needs to be exponential. This needs to be linear growth. Like you need to show a guy getting a little bit better each and every day. Stack great days. And if you have that, then I think that they'll be able to be a good defensive line, to be a very good defensive line in 2023. Because I think you saw in 2022 when things were clicking, they were pretty good. But it was just the peaks and valleys were too high, man. There was just some games, like you think of Ohio State for one, right, where the defensive line was just quiet, right? Like they just didn't make a ton of plays. You need your defensive line to take a step up and be a lot more playmakers this season coming up, because they're going to need it. They're going to need it if they want to get to that, to get to the mountaintop.
Let's move on to some other position groups, Ryan. And I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on this next one because we've talked about it a lot, and that's cornerback. Yeah. And this, without question, right now is the strength of the defense heading into 2023. You have, in my opinion, one of the best cornerback coaches in the business, in Mike Mickens, who has proven himself to be so. I think from the minute he got here, he's coaching up with Nick McLeod. He's got Tariq Bracy, who then has kind of a mental collapse, and he's to the point where he has to start Clarence Lewis as a true freshman, right? And that team did what? They went to the college football playoff, right? And he's doing it just completely outmanned. Goes out there that year, can't go on the road, gets a pretty solid recruiting class, in my opinion, that I still think has a chance to help this team out. And the only reason that recruiting class hasn't helped out more is because the one he got the next year was even better, with Benjamin Morrison and Jaden Mickey. And I know some people that believe that this incoming class might even be better than last year's class. Even people that agree with me that Benjamin Morrison's the best of the four-man group feel that way because they feel that Micah Bell and Christian Gray are that much better than Jaden Mickey. Now, I wonder if some of that's because you're evaluating Jaden Mickey off what you saw here at Notre Dame, which is unfair because Those guys were still going against high school players.
Right.
But as prospects, that's fair. But the point is, it's a conversation. And one of the issues that Notre Dame had recruiting all positions, but corner being a big one, was one year you'd have a really good corner class like you had in 2016 when you signed Julian Love and Troy Pride and Dante Vaughn. And then the next year you kind of go out and it's like you don't even sign a corner. They literally didn't sign a single corner in the 2017 class. They had a couple committed and you lost them. You had Thomas Graham and Elijah Banks. Is Elijah Banks, right? Oh, Elijah Hicks. The kid that went to Cal.
Yeah.
And you had them committed. You lost them because of the coaching turnover. You had Paulson Adebo committed. You lost him because of the coaching turnover, and you were going to lose him anyway. As soon as Stanford offered, he was out. He was gone. It was a well-known thing. And so then it was always that, Ryan. It was always just like, well, 1 year's good, and then the next year it's like you get one good player, but you don't get anybody else. Like that vaunted 2013 class, they got Cole Luke. The other corner is Rashad Kinlaw, and you're like, that ain't it, right? Well, now Mickens is kind of 3 years in a row. He's done it. And he's already got a really high upside kid in the 2024 class already committed in Carson Hobbs. So recruiting at corner, good, real good. The coaching has something like we talked last year right before the season. Like, I don't know why people are criticizing Mike Mickens as a position coach. Like, that was one of those things that was weird to me. Like, first of all, the cornerbacks weren't bad last year at all. They weren't. There's a lot of blown assignments and some things that had to get better. But I think a lot of it's because Mickens became Brian Kelly's sideline whipping boy. And you would just see it every game, Brian Kelly's in Mike Mickens' face. I don't know how he didn't punch him. Like, I probably would have. I could, just the way that he would talk to him and stuff like that, it bothered me. I don't know why. It was weird. He coached Mickens. It was weird. He hired him. This is very strange. But I thought the corners, when you look at what they were working with, you had a receiver turned corner at one position. You had Clarence Lewis as a sophomore at another. You had Tariq Bracy coming back, who I thought was pretty good last year in 2021, to be honest with you. You had Ramon Henderson, who wasn't really a natural corner. You were trying to do all these things with God. You just didn't have great talent. Now you look at it and say, now he's got, Cam Hart's evolved. He's now a year older. He finally gets guys that kind of he recruited in here, and you look at what they're doing. And so I think he's an outstanding position coach, and he's an outstanding recruiter. And when I look at this football team, I think this cornerback room is loaded, and the future looks bright, and the present is outstanding, to where right now I don't think there's a debate about what the best position group on this offense, on this defensive side of the ball is. It's really not. When you just forget the coaching part, just look at the talent, it's corner. Yes. And then when you include the coaching, this is clearly the best position group. And when we have said that in the past, where the coaching and the talent was best part of this defense, I mean, like, Ryan, you know what it is? Because of how he started the season, mm-hmm. I don't think a lot of fans appreciate how good Cam Hart was in the last 6-7 games of the year.
Yeah,
because of how he started. And it's fair. It's fair to criticize how he started the season, and we can get into, his hamstring was hurt and all. Okay, but he still made mistakes and still got beat. Okay, that's fair. I'm not defending that. But you can't only focus on that and ignore the fact that kind of post-Carolina on, that dude was outstanding. Agreed. Which is why nobody ever threw at him. I mean, he was really good.
Yes. And I mean, was there about a big a recruit win this offseason than getting Cam Hart back as far as what 2023 is going to look like? I mean, honestly, man, you get him to come back who – I mean, folks, I'm here to tell you, if Cam Hart doesn't have the injuries this year, he's going in the NFL draft, most likely, right? Like, more than likely. But having him back, it's a blessing in disguise, the fact that there was a little bit of durability stuff in 2022, because now you have potentially one of the best cornerback duos in the country this year. I mean, top 5 cornerback duo, probably. I mean, I just off the top of my head, I mean, you have Cam Hart, who's now battle-tested, 2-year starter. You have Benjamin Morrison, who's a freshman All-American, 6 interceptions. And by the way, you have another great cornerback group, Jaden Mickey, who played a lot. And then you have Micah Bell, Christian Gray, who Christian Bell might not have the early impact that Benjamin Morrison has, but stylistically, he has some comparisons as far as body type.
Did you say Christian Gray?
Yeah, Christian Gray. Yeah. From the length perspective, just kind of the.
But why? Why might he not have the same impact of Benjamin Morrison?
Because it's not needed.
Because there's Benjamin Morrison already there.
Exactly.
If Benjamin Morrison hadn't come to Notre Dame, to Ryan's point, then Christian Gray maybe could come in and have a similar Benjamin Morrison type of impact next season. That's the point Ryan's making. But because there is Benjamin Morrison there, and had Cam Hart gone pro, I'd have been like, hey, field corners, you better watch out, because this cat from St. Louis is going to come in and try to take your job.
Exactly. And Brian, not to mention the fact that you've had the luck you've now had the last couple of years, you have Clarence Lewis, who could be a Swiss Army knife now.
Yes.
Like it's just who's a 2-year starter for Notre Dame. It's like wild.
To the point where I'm begging them to move Clarence Lewis to safety, not because I think he's a terrible corner, because he's not a terrible corner.
Because he could be valuable.
He'd be much more valuable there. He's a good backup now that, if you use him correctly, would be better than he's been in Notre Dame. That's the one guy I didn't think they used well last year at times. And so to me, this group is really loaded, Ryan, and it's going to get better. And to your point, if Jaden Mickey or Clarence Lewis or Chance Tucker don't play well, this cat over here is going to come and beat you out. Right?
I was about to say, because, Christian Gray is an early enrollee. I think he's moving in tomorrow, right? You're one great offseason from a Christian Gray and Clarence Lewis just being a good football player to, if you're Ryan Barnes or you're Chance Tucker, it's like, I might never play a meaningful snap at Notre Dame. It might not happen. I might get passed up because of the job Mike Mickens has done, continuing to acquire talents. Guys, Christian Gray, like, LSU wanted Christian Gray. Ohio State wanted Christian Gray.
They both pushed
USC
hard. Let me tell you something, too, Ryan. You and I know this behind the scenes, that LSU and Ohio State did not stop trying to flip Christian Gray the entire time.
Georgia was in Micah Bell's ear until signing day. Yes, some big-time programs wanted these kids.
Right.
It could arguably be a better haul than what you saw in 2022, which is saying a lot for the impact you got early on.
I would say the upside's higher in that class. Mm-hmm. I'll say this about Micah Bell, though. Yeah. We saw during the week of the Army practices the elite talent that he has, but also why he's going to need time.
Yes.
Because he's still very raw as a corner, technically.
And he played safety
for the position.
Yeah.
He needs a lot of work technically, but when he can just run with you, he's really good. And he plays the ball a lot better than I thought he was going to play the ball too, Ryan.
Agree.
But he just needs a lot of technical work, where Benjamin Morrison kind of showed up with a good foundation of technical skill to work on. Like his dad, who played in college football, played safety, but played in college football, I think had a cup of coffee in the NFL as too, I believe. They must have worked a lot together, or he got someone to work with Benjamin, because his technique improved a ton from his junior year of high school to his freshman year of college. Improved a ton. And that's partly why he was an impact player sooner than expected. I thought he was going to have a tough transition technically, because he wasn't a super fundamentally sound player in high school. He just was really talented. But that improvement is going to be helpful, in my opinion. The point is, the present and future of this position is in good hands.
Very good.
And Jack Swarbrick and the leadership at Notre Dame needs to do whatever they can to make Mike Mickens as financially comfortable as they need to keep him here as long as possible. Right? Yeah. That's just a fact.
There's going to be a lot of SEC schools.
Oh, man. and his loyalty to Marcus Freeman can only go so far, because you know who he's most loyal to? His wife and daughter.
Exactly.
That's who a position coach always needs to be most loyal to. And if Notre Dame's, let's say Notre Dame's paying a guy $1 million and other schools only paying $2.5 million, that's a pretty big deal, you know? So I'm not saying that that's happening. I don't know if those offers are out there right now. I'm just telling you right now, teams around the country are taking notice. Because here's what teams do that, especially teams in the SEC. This guy's kicking our butt on the recruiting trail. Let's go hire him. You know what I mean? So he doesn't have to do that anymore. And so that's going to be a big part of it. So cornerback's in a great position.
Yes.
We'll talk about safety, Ryan, because this is a really interesting one. And somebody even in the chat had said, why does Chris O'Leary get a pass and everybody's hard on Al Washington? Number one, I don't know what you're talking about there, because we have had plenty to say about Chris O'Leary on the recruiting trail. I hammered Chris O'Leary last year for not landing a single safety commit in that class. Wasn't all his fault, but A lot of it was, right? Like the Xavier Nwankpa thing, I somewhat put on him because you've got to recognize that this kid got upset about something way before you did, and he didn't. Came out this year, got Peyton Bowen and all those guys, and Peyton Bowen screwed him over. Again, you've got to kind of maybe recognize that a little bit quicker. And people say, well, they did. They got Brandon Hillman. But again, Chris O'Leary is not the guy that found Brandon Hillman. Chad Bowden is. Chris O'Leary is not the guy that recruited Brandon Hillman. Chad Bowden did. Brandon Hillman was not a safety recruit until they lost Peyton Bowen. Now, I can tell you with confidence that Chad Bowden always knew that if Peyton leaves, this is where we're going to put him. That's exactly why they recruited him, because if we keep Peyton Bowen, he's a rover, he's a receiver, he's a whatever. If we lose Peyton Bowen, nice, easy transition right there to safety. But even then, it's a very low floor, high ceiling group. And to me, you can't have the back to – if they'd have got Xavier Nwankpa last year, I'm singing Chris O'Leary's praises when you put him with this three-man group.
Sure.
But you didn't. You missed on him. You missed on all the safeties last year. And this year did some good things. But 2024 is a very important cycle for Chris O'Leary.
Yes.
Very important cycle. He's got to have another class like this one at the minimum for next year. I'm a believer that safety is a position where you don't necessarily need elite players if the rest of your defense is as good as it needs to be. Don't get that twisted that I don't want elite players. I want a Kyle Hamilton talent. I want a Harrison Smith talent. I want that a Lewis Seen from Georgia. I want that kind of talent on my roster. What I'm saying is you don't need it to be a championship football team. And I don't think Georgia's safety this year were elite players. They were good. They were young. One of the guys that played it tough for them was a true freshman, Malachi Starks, and he had true freshman issues, right? I mean, inconsistencies, mistakes. And so, to me, if you're just good, if you give me a Don Schuler's and Ben Minich's and Brandon Hillman's on a consistent basis, and then occasionally get me a Harrison Smith or a Kyle Hamilton, I'm good. Because I'm going to tell you something right now. The best safety group that Notre Dame had did not have a Kyle Hamilton or a Harrison Smith talent on it. It didn't. And that's the 2018 group. Kyle Hamilton didn't show up till the next year. That was without question the best safety group that Notre Dame had was in 2018. And Jalen Elliott and Loie Gilman, a 3-star and a 2-star. And so I just feel like if you're smart and a good athlete, you can be a really good college safety. You don't have to be a Kyle Hamilton talent. So I don't feel that way about the D-line. You need big-time talent to be – my debate has only ever been that it's not only 5-star recruits that become that kind of player is my argument, right? I've never said you don't need big-time players. I just feel big-time players sometimes are Nolan Smiths that are the number 1, number 2, number 3 player in the country, and sometimes those elite players are Isaiah Foskey's, who no one had in the top 200.
Sure.
That's my point. But you need big-time players. I don't think you necessarily need that at safety if the rest of your defense is good. Give me a smart, heady, always in the right place bunch of safeties, and I'm going to have a pretty freaking good defense if I'm good in those positions where I need the top-level talent. And so that's partly why I'm not as hard on Chris O'Leary as I am on Al Washington. But trust me, Chris O'Leary is in our crosshairs. It's just, okay, let me see what you're going to do here in 2024. Here's the other reason that he's not in the same boat. I think he's done a really good job coaching.
Yeah.
I think the safety tandem, the group the last 2 years has been really well coached, Ryan. Really well coached. To the point where Houston Griffith and DJ Brown guys that aren't elite talent were quality football players this year. You know, you had a converted corner and a converted safety who literally converted in the middle of his first season at Notre Dame, Chris O'Leary, to now they're the future of your position at safety.
It's funny.
Right?
Yeah.
The coaching part hasn't been an issue for me with Chris O'Leary. It's the recruiting part that needs to get better. That's the difference between him and Al Washington. It's because Al Washington didn't do a great job with the coaching part this year either. I think Chris O'Leary, like if you gave Chris O'Leary the talent at his position that Al Washington had to work with at his position, you know what I mean? Like, there's something there, man. There's definitely something there, in my opinion. Thoughts, Ryan?
No, I agree. I think that just looking at the safety room, man, like if we're talking about and this is all due respect to the DJ Browns and Houston Griffiths of the world, but you're not talking about elite talents, right? You're not talking about elite football players. You have to be well coached and you have to be disciplined and you have to do all kind of the finer parts of play in the position. But I mean, for me, man, like I'm always going to be a little bit optimistic because I saw the flashes of Xavier Watts this year, right? Where I'm like, okay, that guy, if he takes a step forward, he can be a dude, right? If Adon Schuler comes in, he's ready to play, he can maybe give you something as a freshman. Ramon Henderson is a guy that I think used correctly could be an asset to you on the back end of a defense. I think that I think they all have good parts to them. I think that the inconsistency is that you don't have the one guy that can do everything, right? Like, I don't think you have that guy, but I think you can mix and match and it could be a really good unit. It's just about you don't have a Peyton Bowen, right? That you could put into every role and to be that guy potentially. And
you're talking about Peyton Bowen from a versatility standpoint, not necessarily 5-star player standpoint.
100%. Yeah.
And Hillman's the same way, Ryan. He's not a guy that I see with a future playing over the top of a defense. He's an alley guy.
Exactly. Yeah.
Adon Schuler is that way too. I don't see Adon, although you did say you thought he played the center field a little bit better than you thought he was going to do at the All-Star game, but I don't know if that's his strength.
Right.
Right.
Yep.
Like, he's a tackler.
Yes.
So even if he can play center field, are you really utilizing the best of his ability there? Ben Minich is the one who showed me as a senior that he could be that guy more than I thought he could be.
Yeah.
Because you and I didn't think he could do that as a junior,
no.
But as a senior, he definitely showed me that kind of movement skill. So it's a good group. It's just they need to start stacking some of those classes on top of each other, in my opinion. Because it also helps with special teams as well. You can't have the misses that they had last year and then come back with this class. If you're going to miss like last year, then you need a Peyton Bowen. Yes. That's my thing. And they didn't get it done. So, but the coaching is good, And
I selfishly want to see Chris O'Leary be able to work with an elite talent, right? Like, I mean, I want to see him work with an Xavier Nwankpa. Excuse me. I want to see him work with a Peyton Bowen. I want to see those guys. But I do think there's maturation from him that needs to take place as a recruiter. I don't think we know how good he can be. I don't think we have a definite understanding of is he a liability in this regard? Can he be a huge asset? Like, I think right now there's too much mixed, as far as the couple big misses over the last couple years. So I think there's obviously answers that need to be executed here over the next couple years. But I think that from the short term, I do anticipate Chris O'Leary getting the most out of Xavier Watts. I do. I think that he will do that. I think that he'll get the most out of DJ Brown for another year. I think he'll get the most out of Ramon Henderson. To your point, I don't think coaching is the issue. It's just acquisition of talent is the issue for me.
Right.
Enough talent, I should say.
Right. Exactly. I think that's a very fair way of putting it. The talent isn't where it needs to be. The coaching is.
Yes.
And it's going to be up to him to do a good job of that. Now, here's kind of where we also need to talk about Thomas Harper, because where does he fit into this whole puzzle? Because I think he's going to be part nickel corner, part safety. Getting him was a big thing. But here's the deal. Eventually, you're going to have to start recruiting that kid out of high school. And I don't think that there's that guy in this class, because I believe that ideally Notre Dame would like to have a 5-man secondary alignment where the slot is not a pure corner like a Tariq Bracy. They'd like to have more of a bigger corner, either a Christian Gray or a safety-ish type of guy that can cover, like a Peyton Bowen kind of. I mean, and again, I'm not talking about the 5-star, but I'm talking about the athleticism he brought where he could play center field, play alley, but more so come up and play in the slot. He could have played that position very early on. And so for me, that is something that I see. And the reason I think it's best to talk about him here is because I do think he's going to be coached as a safety. Because and here's the thing that you talk about where the defense goes in 2023. I think this was important to get Thomas Harper because I was not thrilled about it at first, partly because I didn't know a lot about. How can you be thrilled about a guy you don't know a lot about?
Sure.
So when I say not thrilled, not that I was upset, but it didn't fire me up because I didn't know a lot about the kid. And then you see his production. You're like, well, it's not great production, And then you watch the film, Ryan. You're like, this guy is like the perfect nickel in the defense, especially one like Al Golden's, because on any given snap, you can use him at slot, alley safety, boundary safety, middle of the field. He's done all of it in the same game at Oklahoma State, where Tariq Bracy was a nickel corner. That's it.
Yeah. Yep.
Nickel corner. And now you've got a chance to kind of really be multiple. You can do things where if teams want to, go in motion, you can just roll your safety down and then he's there. And, he's back in the middle of the field. He's playing well. There's just a lot of different things you can do with him that I think you put him and Xavier Watts kind of on opposite sides. And I feel like that gives you a lot of quickness and athleticism to play your alleys or your slots. Because, you just roll Xavier down, and I think Xavier can play that job, play that role.
It's almost like you remember when Gary Patterson first kind of implemented the 4-2-5. They used to run umbrella coverages, right, where they used to have the almost like a 3-high look, but they would always rotate down, so it would still be 2 high, but that those 2 outside safeties would always be interchangeable because you need them to be able to rotate down or rotate to 2 high situations. To your point, right?
And they would go cloud at times too.
Yep.
So depending on how you line up, they didn't want to have to go field boundary. They wanted to try to keep it to a side because teams were going tempo, and you needed to be able to play off the hash and play center field. Exactly. Right. We'll see. We'll kind of see how this plays out. Right. We're going to see how this plays out. But he was a very important addition to this depth chart because I don't know if there's anybody else on the roster that can do what he does and what he's done now for 3 years in the Big 12.
Not early.
This guy's played a lot of football, Ryan. This guy's played over 1,000 snaps of football in the Big 12.
Yep.
He's used to the ball being thrown at him. You know what I mean? And I'll tell if you want to see the impact he had on this Oklahoma State defense this year, go watch the TCU game right after he got hurt. And look what TCU did the rest of the game. So you're going to tell me that's miraculously right late in third quarter when he got hurt is miraculously when TCU figured it out on defense. I mean, figured out the Oklahoma State defense. Or is the only really cover guy they had last year, in my opinion, gone.
Yeah. And
now they had no answers. Because you look at what they did in the fourth quarter and overtime after Thomas Harper got hurt, and then what they did late, boy, that was a different defense. That was a completely different defense. And I'm going to get a little bit somewhat hyperbolic here, Ryan. Mm-hmm. But, here's another thing to consider is after that TCU game, he didn't play for a while. He played partly in the Kansas State, a little tiny bit in the Kansas State game, and then missed the entire year. When Thomas Harper played, they were 5-1 before he got hurt. After he got hurt, they went 2-5, and the defense fell apart. Ugh. I'm not saying he's the only reason, but what I'm saying is they lost a really important part of that, and the attempt to kind of move pieces around to fix that hurt the defense as a whole. Now that guy's going to be in the Notre Dame defense, and giving Al Golden, who wants to be multiple, needs to be multiple, as many weapons as possible that you don't have to sub for, because that's the one thing that makes college football a little bit different than the NFL is it can be harder sometimes to sub package in college football if the other team doesn't sub. If the other team's subbing nonstop, then it's easy to sub package. But there's times where you can kind of get caught in some looks you don't like personnel wise because of how teams go at you. Especially like Georgia, for example, they go 12 personnel, and then you're like, hey, let's put our big boys in the field. The next thing you know, they're going empty, and you're in your big personnel.
Yeah,
that's the nature of what teams can do, right? Mm-hmm. And so Notre Dame could do that to people if they wanted to. They just don't. And so those are things that I kind of want to see from him to be able to counter that. But you need the versatile pieces. That's what I think Jordan Patel and Josh Burnham can bring to the Viper position that Isaiah Foskey did. There were things that Foskey brought that they don't. I'm not saying like, oh, Viper's going to be better now. I'm saying it's going to be different.
Right.
It's going to be more multiple. It's going to be more diverse where you don't have to sub out. That's what Thomas Harper does. Like, to me, if I'm Notre Dame, I want to see them with the personnel they have now be a 4-2-5, 3-3-5 hybrid team out of 4-2 personnel.
Yes.
That's what I want to see. I want to see a Mike and a Will and a Viper. And I want to see a true nickel. Now, I would move Jack Kaiser inside and let him compete there. I would still keep him a rover because there's going to be times you need the 3 linebacker personnel. There's going to be times when it's necessary.
Sure.
But with all due respect to Jack, I just don't know if that linebacker rover spot is going to be manned by a guy like him as much in 2023, in my opinion. if it's going to be manned by somebody, it has to be a Nolan Ziegler. It has to be a Jalen Snead type. Somebody that's longer, twitchier, faster, that brings more versatility. Because Jack was an underrated player this year when he was used correctly.
Mm-hmm.
He had the biggest good to bad ratio of all the linebackers, in my opinion. Because Marist was just bad. Like, we didn't see a whole lot of good from Marist, right? JD was kind of okay to good. JD was rarely bad. Sure. There were times when Jack was like, dude, this guy's a playmaker. And then times you're like, this guy can't cover anybody. And it was about how he was used. He may have a rover body, but he has an inside linebacker game, in my opinion. Jack Kaiser's been at his best when he's attacking the football. And so I think you almost kind of have to put him inside. And the only way that you can be a 3 linebacker team, in my view, and have a great defense is if you're going to play the younger guys more. That to me, Ryan, is the key. And so as we kind of transition to linebacker, that's personnel wise, JD's a good Mike. I'm good with that. I know he's a bit of a whipping boy for fans. JD's a good football player. The other linebacker positions to me are major question marks. And I don't know if Prince Colley's the answer, just because he's got a lot to learn about the position, but he's also had some trouble staying on the field this past year with some different things. And so are they gonna do enough to get the young guys ready? Are they gonna give Nolan Ziegler a chance this spring to battle? Are they gonna give Jalen Snead a chance in the spring to battle? Or are they just gonna roll out the veterans again? That's gonna be a big question mark for me. Because at this point in time, Marist Liufau just kind of is what he is. And he needs to prove to me that he's not that. He's not getting the benefit of the doubt from me that I'm giving a younger player. But I don't know if that's how Al Golden's going to feel about it. And that, to me, is the biggest question mark on this entire football team right now, Ryan, is linebacker play. Who's going to play? How are they going to use it? And will the position coach / defensive coordinator realize that, dude, your group is the biggest problem we have, and it's because you're putting too much on their plate. It's as simple as that.
Do you think linebacker is the most frustrating position on the team right now, in the sense that there's so much talent in that room, man? Yeah. And it's just, you're not getting much out of it. You're not. I mean, again, I agree with you. I think JD is a rock solid Mike. Good football player, no doubt. Jack was inconsistent this year. The highs were good. The lows were far too often, Mike. And I agree with you 100%. Marist Liufau was a massive disappointment for me. Massive, massive disappointment. But outside of those players, you already mentioned them. You already mentioned Jalen Snead. You already mentioned Nolan Ziegler. Not to mention, hey, also, there's 3 2023 guys coming now, like
including
in the
2
spring.
top 100 players in Jaden Osbury and Drake Bowen.
Yeah.
I talked over that last part, Ryan.
Yes.
They're showing up next week.
Exactly.
Not in the fall, not in the summer. They're showing up next week.
And if you've talked to Jaden Osbury or Drake Bowen, you know that they're not coming to just sit, right? Like, they're coming to compete. No. The question is whether, if coaching will allow them to genuinely compete, right? Like, that's the biggest question mark for me. But it's maddening, the production you got from linebacker this year, because you just signed one of the best linebacker groups that you have in how many years? Like, I mean, the 4-man class that I understand that
you returned 2 starters. I want to add to that, Ryan, because you returned 2 starters.
Yeah.
Another guy who missed last year but played a ton the year before. Mm-hmm. So you had 3 linebackers that played a decent amount of football, and the incoming freshman. So it's not just you had this incoming freshman class, and you're going to, if you go out there with a true bunch of true freshman linebackers, you're going to have some problems, because they're going to give up. They're going to make mistakes, just like Jalen did in the Gator Bowl. He had some plays where, like, yep, that's why he's got to play. And then there's other times you're like, dude, they're manipulating you. They know they can take advantage of you right now, and they're going after you with misdirections and things like that. And so that's kind of the thing for me is why I'm just a little concerned, with the direction of this group.
Yeah.
Honestly, because it's not about the talent. That's really not my issue. It's are you playing the right combination of the talent and putting those guys in positions to be successful? Or is your defense here's the funny thing. I was told by a source that one of the things that they did with that their justifications for not playing one of the freshmen is because they said he has to get bigger. He's not 230 pounds. They need to get him to 230 pounds.
Okay.
And so I'm looking at I'm asking myself, and I'm like, hold on a second. Are any of the linebackers actually 230 pounds? And you're like, okay, Marist barely is.
Yeah.
Like Jack Kaiser's 223. JD Bertrand's not 230 pounds. I'm sorry. He's not. And I'm like, what's this obsession about weight thing? Or is that just an excuse to say, not to play the younger guys?
Yeah.
That's my question.
Mm-hmm.
And so why do you, it's like, it's been the maddening thing with Kelly for a while. And Golden's got some of this to him for me, a little bit of this to me. Why are you holding to the young players to a higher standard than you hold the veterans? Like Maris played like you'd expect a freshman who's never played before to play.
Yes. If that was Jalen Sneed, you'd be like, okay, it's freshman year, right? Like that's it. I mean, it's like Jaden Mickey this year, right? Jaden Mickey had his lows, right? But you're like, that's a freshman. What do you expect, right? Like that's baptism by fire. That's growth. But I mean, you're right, Brian. And I'll say this now, going into 2023. If you have back-to-back linebacker hauls of, and I understand Joshua Burnham's playing Viper now, and I understand that Junior Tuilamak is kind of playing a little bit of both at this point. But if you go 2-year span of getting Joshua Burnham, Junior Tuilamak, Nolan Ziegler, Jalen Sneed into Drake Bowen, Jay Nosbury, and Preston Zinter, and you can't figure out the linebacker room to make it at least a very good units. Right. Not even talking about elite. I'm just talking about very good.
That's a coaching problem. That's a coaching problem, Ryan.
It is
not a player problem.
It's not a player problem. No, it's not. Because if you watch if you watch all those guys film back to back to back, you're like, wow, man.
And then throwing Prince Colley, throwing JD Bertrand.
Exactly.
Right. We often forget Prince because he's like that middle child, right?
He was only
middle child
linebacker in that
syndrome
class,
is real.
right?
You know what I mean? Exactly. Well, Kahanu Kia was,
yes.
But he's on a mission and won't be back till 2024.
Sure.
So you look at it and you're like, man, this is just, there's no, like you said, Ryan, you could maybe justify it last year because, a bunch of freshmen. Okay, cool. That's over. That's over. You can't use the whole, well, Prince Colley's only in year 2 of being a linebacker. He was more of a receiver, running back in high school. Cool. That's gone now.
Mm-hmm.
He's year 2 of year 3 playing linebacker. Nolan Ziegler's going into a second spring. Jalen Sneed's going into a second spring. I don't want to hear those excuses anymore. Everybody in college football is playing young guys. Georgia played 2 really young inside linebackers.
Both
right?
sophomores,
I'm not saying,
I think, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Both true sophomores. Yeah. I mean, people talked about how Georgia's got they weren't a very old team this year in all spots. They were
young,
pretty young in a lot of spots. I mean, they started 2 true freshmen at times this year on defense and played 3 or 4 true freshmen at times this year. Bear Alexander, I think, was a true freshman. Malachi Starks was a true freshman. They rotated true freshman in, I believe, at corner.
Michael Williams, the freshman D lineman.
Yeah. Oh, he's another one. They had I think one of their linebackers was a true freshman that was in the rotation, I believe. Mm-hmm. And they figured it out. Okay, so they're 5 stars and these guys are not. Jalen Sneed was a 5-star, first of all.
Yes.
Nolan Ziegler was a 4-star kid. So so he doesn't have to play as good as the Georgia kids, but there's a difference between being that and not playing a freaking snap.
And I mean, even if you want to look at like Drake Bowen coming in, Brian, has there been a more decorated linebacker to come in college football over the last couple years, recruiting wise, than Drake Bowen? I mean, the kid's a Buckus Award winner, 2-time Gatorade Player of the Year, Mr. Football in the state of Indiana, and by the way, also the All-American Bowl Defensive Player of the Year. Right? Like, don't miss me with the talent conversation. Just miss me with it. It's not a
for
thing.
1,800 yards last year. And if I hear one more person say, but he was a 2A guy. His school was 2A. He didn't play 2 schools in the regular season. He played one all year.
Yeah.
So, it's some lame stuff said. But the fact of the matter is, Ryan, the talent is there.
Yes.
It's time to coach it up.
It's like the wide receiver group we talked about yesterday. There's going to be a lot of NFL scouts over the next couple of years walking through the linebacker room and being like, whoa.
These cats can run.
Who's that guy?
These cats can run. Yeah.
But you haven't seen it on the field.
But that's the thing is, Ryan, they're not a real big linebacking core, which then speaks to this is why you need to be a speed team.
Mm-hmm.
You don't recruit the guys that you recruited on the D-line in 2023 class. You don't recruit the corners they're recruiting. You don't recruit the linebackers they're recruiting and then say, let's play big boy football. Yeah. That makes no sense to me. You're recruiting guys can flat out freaking run.
Mm-hmm.
Like Drake Bowen's a really good athlete. I would argue he's not their fastest linebacker. I would argue that. I bet you it's close.
Sure.
I bet you it's close. And he can run.
Yeah, he can
I think
run.
Jaden Osbury's faster. I think Drake's
Possible.
more big and powerful and more of a downhill box guy in the future. Jaden Osbury's, to me, if he was an inch taller or maybe a couple inches longer, he'd be like you built that wheel in a lab. That's kind of, you know what I mean? And those are the things that you're bringing in. And Preston Zinter in past years would be getting a lot more excitement from Notre Dame fans in the past because he's a good football player. But
he is a good football
just
player.
The way that they've recruited linebacker the last 2 years is kind of like he kind of gets forgotten about. That kid's a good football player.
And if they do start running more 3-3-5 stuff, he is the perfect Sam linebacker in that defense.
Which is kind of the Viper, just so people understand what the Sam means. It's a kind of a Viper.
Yep.
So it's going to be very interesting to see how it plays, Ryan. Very interesting how it plays and how it's coached, because I think of all the positions on the team, that was the least fundamentally sound group on the entire team this year. Which, when you consider who the head coach is with James Laurinaitis and Al Golden, it's a little bit problematic to me. It's a little bit problematic to me that it's that way.
I mean, and I'm not trying to throw everything on Maris Loifow because it's a position problem, right? It's not just a Maris Loifow problem. But, I mean, guys, if you want to go back and watch the Juju McDowell first run of the game where he had the 13-yard or whatever on that first drive, it's the most maddening thing I've ever seen in my life, man. It was Jordan Patelho setting the edge, did a good job setting the edge. You had Benjamin Morrison coming outside in as that contained player. Fantastic. Looks good. I don't know what Maris was thinking on this play, but he decided, hey, man, there's two guys in the C gap already. I'm going to join them. And then completely vacated the B gap and let Juju McDowell just score 3 for a 13-yard gain. That stuff that's coaching. It's got to be, right? I mean, I don't know. We'll see what happens with the maturation of the position. I hope it takes a massive step forward, but there were just too many of those brain farts year one. Either these guys are super confused or they're not being coached properly. And regardless, that's a coaching issue on both sides of it, right? That's a coaching issue. So we'll see if it improves. And I hope it does, because you have 3 really good linebacker guys on your staff coaching the linebackers. Just needs to be a cohesive understanding of what's expected, I think.
And you had a first-year coach who seemed to be more concerned with coordinating the defense than he was with necessarily coaching a position group, which is it's understandable. You had a guy that knows the position but has played it at the NFL level for a decade and never really coached like this before. Sure. There's a learning curve. So I'm willing to give them okay, let's see what you do now. I'm willing to kind of say, okay, that year's in the past. Let me see what you do now with those guys. Because there's too much knowledge in that group. Like, there's way too much knowledge of football and linebacker play on that staff for it not to get better. And that's kind of where my optimism comes from, because I'm like, there's no way Marcus Freeman looks at the play of the linebackers this year and is like, yeah, I'm totally fine with that. There's no way that James Laurinaitis does that. There's no way, in my opinion, that Al Golden can look at that and be good with it. Now the question is fixing it doesn't equal, we'll just put the young guys in there. That's a small step. Because then they're going to have the same problems as the veterans had, except they're going to be less experienced, which means they're going to have even more issues.
Yes.
There's a fundamental flaw that needs to be corrected first, which is you were putting too much on their plate. Let's simplify a little bit and make sure that first and foremost that you teach these kids how to play great, fundamentally sound, fast, physical, wrap-up football, right? They're all different things. Be fast, be physical, wrap up correctly. Be in space, know where you're supposed to be. Then when they've got that down, like, honestly, my defense in the spring would be super base in a lot of different ways. Because I'm going to say we're going to be the most fundamentally sound team in college football next year. And then towards the end of spring, maybe in the summer and fall camp, then we can start adding to our packages. Because a lot of this you guys are going to know. But I'm teaching the basics. And there's so many coaches that go away from that now in college football. And it drives me nuts. They get so scheme-oriented that we just got to throw a million different things at them in the spring. Why? You don't play a game for 8-9 months. What you do scheme-wise is so irrelevant in the spring from a defensive standpoint. It's a little bit more important on offense because scheme is kind of what you do. You've got to get the quarterbacks and the receivers kind of on a similar page and all that kind of stuff. But, like, offensive line, I don't care that you run 87,000 different running plays in the spring. I'm teaching stance, step, start, hand play, all communication. That's my focus in the spring. Same thing with defense. I don't care if you have more than three coverages in the spring. Don't care. Well, the offense is going to get the better of you. That's kind of a good thing. Make those kids learn how to play the game the right way. Make sure, hey, if you can go out and stop them when you've only got these three coverages because you've mastered what we can do, then imagine how good we're going to be when you've got those things mastered. And I can add some wrinkles from week to week in football. If Al Golden's willing to do that, to say, hey, guys, this spring, our focus is on these kids being the most fundamentally sound group of players. They need to be fundamentally sound, fast, and aggressive group of players in college football. If there's a group of players in college football that are more fundamentally sound and more aggressive and than our guys, then we are failing at our jobs. And then you'll have a whole freaking month of football in the fall to start putting the scheme in. Spend the first week or two just, hey, let's remind about all these different things. But then you got the whole rest of the spring to say, now let's add into the scheme because you're switching schemes week to week anyway.
Sure.
So at least get the foundation right. And then it'll be easier to implement those schemes because there's a foundation of fundamental football that you can build upon each week. That's the key. If they do that, Ryan, this defense is going to be nasty.
Agreed.
If they don't do that, then we're going to see a slightly better version of what we saw last year, in my opinion, simply because they know the defense better.
Agree.
That's why. So anything to add to that, Ryan, before we move on to the mailbag?
No, I mean, I think that there's a year one to year two maturation that naturally occurs, to your point, right? There's a deeper understanding to the system, but I think more than anything, we talked about this at the beginning of this podcast, is at the end of the day, coaches are paid to understand what their players do best and then put them in the proper position to make plays. That's the end all be all, right? And we didn't see enough of it in year one, in my opinion. You saw some of it, though. It wasn't all bad, right? Like it was a solid job. It needs to be great, though, in order for them to really take that massive step forward. And there are the tools there. There's the talent there. It's just, I think that everyone needs self-awareness, right? Everyone needs to evaluate themselves. You need to be able to take a step back and say, what did I do well? What can I not do? And you need to mesh those two things together. And I think that it's going to be a big offseason for this defense, for Al Golden, this defensive staff to really understand we weren't bad defensively last year, but we could be a lot better. How do we get there and make it a unified thing? Because I think that it seems disjointed at times, right? As far as what they were trying to do and what was happening on the field. It needs to be unified, and I feel like it wasn't in year one.
Experience helps with that, and a system helps with that.
Absolutely.
But there's got to be – they can't just say it's going to – well, just year two of our system will be better. It can't be that. It cannot be just it's all the players. It can't be. Yes. It has to be we've got to set a better foundation of good quality football.
Starts with accountability. With accountability. Yep.
Here's my last key to this, Ryan.
Mm-hmm.
The sophomore class, that group emerging – here's my prediction. The emergence or lack of the sophomore class will be what determines whether this defense can be really good or elite.
And that's the Jalen Sneed, Benjamin Morrison.
Up front, it's Josh Burnham, it's Tyson Ford, it's Aiden Gobira, Donovan Heinisch, a linebacker, it's Jalen Sneed, Nolan Ziegler, Junior Tuihalamaka as kind of a do-it-all, it's Benjamin Morrison, and it's Jaden Mickey. That group is going to have if that group gets a push from the staff and answers that and makes and forces their way on the field, this thing is going to be good because Jordan Patel is a good football player, usually, but he's very inconsistent. But he's also not a guy that I necessarily want playing 60 snaps a game because he's not a real big guy. He's going to wear down. The best thing for Jordan Patel is that he's got someone that can split reps with him, and Josh Burnham needs to be that guy. I want to see, and he stepping up then also helps them move Junior Tuihalamaka around to both sides, where I think he could fit in better. You talk about Tyson Ford kind of having a grow-up period. He had a year to kind of develop and went through some ups and downs. Now it's time, hey, man, you're going into spring number 2. It's time for you to take that step.
Sure.
And linebacker, we've already talked about. Jaden Mickey, we've talked about. But the key, however, is the coaching staff has to focus on that too. They've got to say, yeah, we're obviously going to coach the veterans, but man, our best talent is in this group, in the freshman and sophomore class. And we've got to make sure that we're doing our part to get those guys fundamentally ready to play. That's another reason why it's so important to do the focus more on fundamentals in the spring, Ryan, is because that's going to be so good for those young kids. Your best players from a talent standpoint are in the freshman and sophomore classes. So it's your job to get those guys ready to play. If they don't step up, that's on them.
Sure.
But if you're just going to say we're going to just add on scheme, we're going to defense 2.0 next year, and we're going to do that in the spring, and we're going to be focused on the scheme again, and you don't focus on building a foundation, establishing a foundation of who you are, then they're going to fall behind, and then your defense is going to not be as good as it should be. That's bad coaching. It's very bad coaching. And that's what I want to see be done, because I think there's a lot of talent in those young classes. But young talent doesn't just emerge by itself. It needs to be encouraged, pushed, developed, nuanced, and all that kind of stuff, right? You don't plant a seed and just, you don't like plant a flower in your house out and then just expect it to grow. There's no natural sunlight. There's no way for it to get water, right? You've got to put it in there, and then you've got to make sure you're putting it in the sun enough. You're going to make sure you're watering. You have to do all things you need to do, take care of it, right? And it grows into this beautiful thing. But if you just got to leave it there and put it in the closet, guess what? And focus on other things, guess what? It's not going to grow.
Yeah.
So
look at you with the garden metaphor.
I'm from pistols in one. I got gardens. I'm a versatile dude, man. My analogies are on point. You know what I mean? So this is my parables class at seminary is paying off. You know what I mean? So learning how to use parables to make my point. So I'm excited about this group, Ryan. It's got a potential, but that's kind of why I'm also optimistic, but also concerned, because I don't have a lot of faith that the person in charge of the defense is going to see it the way that I see it.
Sure.
That's my concern.
Yeah.
And my concern is more from just not knowing him very well and knowing guys like him with the NFL background and stuff like that, where it's always about scheme. Those guys don't just have these 180s very often. It's going to have to come from the top. It's going to have to come from Marcus Freeman.
Especially older guys, right? I mean, Al Golden's in his late 50s, right, at this point. So I mean, he's a little bit of an older guy too, and sometimes it's hard for people to change at that type of age, right? So
smart people like to do things that make them look smart. Let's be honest about that.
Sure.
I mean, that's human nature. I'm not even faulting him for that, but it's kind of like doing what I'm encouraging him to do does not show everyone how genius he is as a coach, and does not help him get a head coaching job or get back to the NFL as a coordinator. It just doesn't. And, but that's why they said ultimately the head coach has got to be the one that step up and say, hey, this is what we're going to do. Right. This is how we're going to be. And if the head coach does that, that's not a given. If the head coach does that and the DC responds well, this defense has a chance to be really good. It may not have an Isaiah Foskey in the front seven next year, but if they use it correctly, like we were debating yesterday about whether Riley Mills is a big end or a 3 technique. What we both agree on is he would be even better in a 3-3 look.
No doubt.
We both agreed on that. Howard Cross would be better in a 3-3 look. We both agreed on that. Jordan Botelho and Josh Burnham are perfect Vipers in that type of defense, because you can easily go to a 4 down. Easily go to a 4 down when you need to.
Yep.
But that requires them to say, hey, we got to rethink how we're doing this schematically and rethink how we're doing this from fundamentally. Because if we're going to ask kids to play a lot of different positions, we need to make sure that the footwork and the fundamentals and just the vision and just their eye placement and the eye discipline and what they're keying on, all that stuff, all that real basic stuff that gets lost when you're focusing so much on scheme, has to take precedence.
No doubt.
Has to. And if they do that, Ryan, I'm telling you, this defense next year is going to be nasty. If they don't, it's going to look a lot like it did this year. Good at times, and what the heck are you doing at other times?
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
That's where it's at. So we're going to go to mailbag next, folks. But before we do, I'd ask that you hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, please. We ask you so kindly to hit that 5-star review and to share this podcast. We appreciate that very much. Sign up for the message boards, everybody, at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Got a junior day coming up, so Ryan's has a lot of updates on who's going to be on campus this weekend. We'll try our best to get as much intel from the weekend as we can. Going to be a lot of very, very intriguing players on the board. Ryan, there's a guy that Ryan doesn't know it yet, but Ryan's going to break down a little bit, just a mini film breakdown on the board of a kid that they offered today or yesterday named DeMello Jones.
Yes.
And I saw this kid and I was like, never heard of this kid. Went to his page. He doesn't have a ranking from, and no one's even ranked this kid yet. And I'm like, okay, well, we'll see. And Ryan's like, dude, you've got to watch this DeMello Jones kid. I'm like, all right, cool. Checked it out. And my response was what, Ryan? I gave you one word.
Wow.
That's it. That's it. And then I found out today, Ryan, that he's Deke Cooper's nephew, former Notre Dame safety Deke Cooper, who was one of my favorite players of the 90s. So so that's obviously big. So he's a guy that got offered recently. Ryan's going to have a little quick mini film breakdown of him today or tomorrow. Since I'm springing this on you kind of late, may let you get it up tomorrow. But we're going to start doing some more of that stuff on there too. And that's the affiliate place where you want to be. So why it's so great to be on the board. So mailbag's coming up next, folks. But again, also CFB Nation. We just launched our CFB Nation Twitter page as well. And if you can find that, I'm pulling up the name here. It is at CFB, so college football, CFB Nation 2 is our Twitter page for that, where we'll put some of our college football takes. We'll put our CFB Nation podcasts and our videos and all that kind of stuff. But make sure you're subscribed to the CFB Nation podcast platform and also the CFB Nation YouTube channel, and make sure that you're checking that out. We're getting closer and closer to those 4,000 watch hours. So the help from y'all doing that would be much appreciated. I'm going to get a video up here in a little bit of Bill Trocchi and Bill Bender of Sporting News talking about their way too early top 25, which Bill put out at Sporting News. They're going to talk about that. I'll have that video up here in a little bit as well. It is mailbag time, Ryan, and we're gonna try to work through these as quickly as possible because we've got to run, so we can't have a super long mailbag time today. But tomorrow, Ryan, we're gonna have a lot of mailbag talk because tomorrow is the Friday free for all mailbag. So let's work through some of these as much as we can right here. Irish Blooded says, if Notre Dame comes out and kills it next year and wins the championship, which Hollywood actors would you cast for which coaches? See, here's the problem with that question, Ryan, is by the time that movie's made, it's going to be, 10 years down the road, probably plus.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so like the actors that would play like Marcus Freeman are probably like teenagers right now and not actors. So like, I really don't know, but if you were going to tell me the it's going to be played in a year.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just trying to think like
I got an easy
Shamar
one,
Moore for Marcus Freeman would be
one
for me. Who would you go with?
Well, ideally, I would love a young Denzel Washington, but
Denzel's not young anymore.
I know. I just said ideally. The person that came to mind was Michael B. Jordan because he's
but he's kind of short though, right?
Is Michael B. Jordan short? Is he?
I think so. I think he's a little short. Yeah,
I'm gonna look that up.
I would have had the legend Chadwick Boseman playing Mike Mickens.
Chadwick Boseman. All right.
Unfortunately, he's no longer with us, which still makes me sad when I think about it. I was watching Endgame the other day, and that scene where he comes through the portal at the end just made me sad. Like, it used to get me fired up, but now it makes me sad. Just thinking how he passed away.
That whole loss was so sudden because he didn't tell anybody about it. It was just
wow. Yeah, really sad. So who would play Harry Heastan? That'd be funny.
John Boyd.
John Voight? No, man, you got to get somebody that looks like Harry Heastan. I'm trying to think of.
So anybody that looks like Harry Heastan?
Think of somebody that looks like Harry. I may not want to answer this question because I don't want him to get mad. You know who Michael B. Jordan would be good at playing? It'd be Chancey Stuckey. You know what I mean? Like, I think that would be good. This is so silly. Pete Davidson would play Chris O'Leary.
Oh, that's funny. That's funny. That's really funny.
He's so goofy and a horrible actor, but he just kind of looks a little
He's
bit like
really
Chris
creepy,
O'Leary.
isn't he? He's a little creepy.
He's just so weird looking and so goofy and not good. Yeah. I still don't know how that guy's famous.
Yeah.
Or how he gets hot ladies. It's just the most bizarre thing ever. But like, there's a lot of daddy issues going on there.
Me and my wife talked about that the other day, man. It is bizarre how that happens.
Somebody just said, this was great. Somebody just said that Sam Pendleton could play Harry Heastan.
That's so good, man.
Yeah.
That's good. I don't know if
Yeah.
Sam could. I don't know if he could act
Yeah.
though. But
Hey, somebody said Sam Elliott for Jack Swarbrick. I would do Harrison Ford for Jack Swarbrick.
that's a
I
good
think that
one.
would make a better fit. Put the glasses on him, that kind of thing. Would make more sense to me. But
yeah. Someone said Michael B. Jordan's 6 foot, so you just need to give him a little lift, and he's fine.
yeah, he looks short. Somebody said Robert Duvall to play Harry Stan. I could see that. I don't know how old he is now, but like the Robert Duvall that played in Secondhand Lions, that guy could play in Harry Stan. I still know what he looks like now.
He's got to be old, right?
He's really old. Yeah, he's got to be really old. So who would I have played Dylan McCullough? That'd be an interesting one. That would be a role for Denzel.
Yes,
because Dylan McCullough's 49. You could get Denzel ready to play, and he's real serious. He's just kind of real. He's just got that really unique personality. So I'm just trying to think. Jared Parker, that'd be kind of an easy one. Just get some kind of, meatwad looking kind of guy. Not that Jared Parker's that way. Just kind of has that look, because he would kind of have.
What was the guy's name from The Hangover? The one that lost a tooth.
You know
what I'm talking about?
The guy that was in the Office.
Yes, that guy could play Jared Parker, in my opinion.
He's kind of too old for him, right?
Is he too old? How old is he
What's
now?
his name? Oh man, what's his name? Yeah, Ed Helms. Yeah, that's
Ed Helms. Ed
That's
Helms.
who it is. That's who it is.
Somebody
said if Tom Cruise could play Jack Reacher, Jordan could play Marcus Freeman. True, very true. But that's why Jack Reacher the series was much better than Jack Reacher the movie, because you actually had someone that looked like the Jack Reacher the books in that one. So
someone said Stetson Bennett could play Brian Mason. That is funny. That's funny. They're the same age, so it makes sense.
Yeah. Somebody said Rob Brown could play Marcus Freeman. That's the guy that played in he was as a Keenan in the Coach Carter.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
Oh, that's not bad.
So
that's
not bad at all. It's not bad at all. So didn't he play in a football movie before?
Yes, he did.
Didn't he play Ernie Davis?
No, wasn't. Wait, wasn't him? I thought Chadwick Boseman was Ernie Davis.
No. He played Floyd Little.
Chadwick Boseman was He
played Floyd Little in that movie.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
Yep. So that'd be a good one. That'd be a good one. Yeah. So I think we've spent enough time on this one. Somebody said Will Smith for Coach Freeman. Heck no.
Someone said Vince Vaughn. Vince Vaughn for Jared Parker. That's actually really
good. Would be a good one.
Yeah, Vince Vaughn's tall, isn't he? Isn't he like really tall?
So is Jared Parker.
Is he like 6 foot? Is he that tall?
He's Jared Parker. He's like 6. Yeah, I'm pretty sure he's like 6'2", 6'3". Yeah.
Is he? You might be right.
Let me go see. Yeah. I think he is. So yeah, I could be wrong on that, but I thought he was a taller, because he played wide receiver. Right.
You might be right.
So
I just know Vince Vaughn's tall. He's very tall.
Yes. Please play some camera. Notice the one guy that we've avoided here is Tommy Reese, because I really don't know who. I don't watch like a lot of movies now, so I really can't think of anybody that would fit that. That's all I'm gonna think about the rest of the day now, right?
It's who looks like Tommy Reese.
Who looks like Tommy Reese? Tommy Reese and Harry Heastan. Those are the two I'm having a hard time with.
Yeah. Oh, Harry Heastan's a tough one. That's a really tough one. Also, because I'm a little scared of Harry Heastan, so I don't want to.
Yes, I don't want to pick the wrong person, and then I run into Harry in somewhere, and he's Somebody said Sean Astin as Coach Harry. Yeah, I don't think Sean Astin would play that role. I don't think that would fit. I don't think he would be able to use the language properly to kind of get that one. Yeah, that'd be hilarious. Somebody said Johnny Knoxville for Tommy Reese. He's a lot older now. So
it's not bad. Like a young version.
It's not a bad one if he was young. Like the Johnny Knoxville from Walking Tall would not have been a bad version of that.
Interesting.
Yeah, would not have been a bad version of that. So yeah, we could do a whole show about that. Somebody said Jason Biggs. Jason Biggs is a dork. There's no way I'd have Jason Biggs play Tommy Reese. There's no way. I have to give you better than that. So I have to think about that one. I'm gonna have to think about that one. Somebody says Shia LaBeouf is Tommy Reese. No.
Well, I would like that just for the comedy of it.
Yeah, that guy. Speaking of people that are weird.
Oh, he's eccentric. I would use the word eccentric with.
Yeah, I got to find like a movie for Ryan Gosling. I got to find some kind of role for Ryan Gosling. Maybe he could be Harry. Maybe he could be Tommy. You know who might kind of have a Tommy look.
Yeah.
And I don't remember his name. He played in. Have you seen Tulsa King, Ryan, with Sylvester Stallone? It's that new series that just came out on Paramount.
No,
It's actually pretty good.
Yeah.
The guy that played it. Oh man, what was it? What I'm trying to think of what other movies. His name. I think his first name's Garrett something. But hold on. Let me look up the cast for that movie. Oh, it's Garrett Hedlund. He would be a guy that I could see. He played in the Tron redo. Okay. He also played in. You ever see Four Brothers? Did you ever see that?
Yes.
He played the younger brother in that.
Oh yeah, I've seen Four Brothers.
Yeah, but I think he'd be a good Tommy Reese. He's played in a football movie before. He also played in Troy. Did you ever see Troy?
Yes.
You see, he was Patroclus in Troy, who's Achilles' nephew. Or whatever. So yeah. Somebody said Tom Holland is Tommy Reese. Tom Holland's like 4'3", right? Tommy Reese is like 6'2". So I don't know if that one would work. You have to put that guy on like about a foot high, thing the whole time. So yeah, I don't think that one. I like the Garrett Hedlund one. So yeah, I like that. Somebody said Dan Boyd. I don't know who Dan Boyd is.
Dan Boyd.
I don't know who that is. Yeah. So anyway, so that's enough fun for that one. So we're gonna move on to some football topics, but I actually had some fun with that answer. So Tobey Maguire's Tommy again. Isn't Tobey Maguire like really short?
Yeah, I think he's really short. Yeah.
So yeah,
I can get where people are going with that though. I can see where they're going.
The look, the face. Yes. I could see that. I could see
like
that.
The haircut, the face. Yeah, I could see that one a little bit.
Yeah. Somebody said John C. Reilly for Harry Stan. What? What?
We'll just do Will Ferrell at that point.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't. That would just make no sense. Thank you. That one wouldn't make any sense to me at all. My just so you know, I have had hopefully my last Mountain Dew recently.
Ooh.
And so that's why I started the show off with a tea, and my wife just made me a smoothie because the reason I like Mountain Dew is it's really sweet. I like sweet drinks. Mm-hmm. So I'm just trying to find some replacements to help me kind of wean off of the sweetness. And so she makes me these really healthy protein shakes that have like natural fruit in them and stuff like that. So I get it still has sugar in it, but it's like more of a natural sugar as opposed to the artificial sweeteners and the high fructose corn syrup and stuff for Mountain Dew. So it's if I get a little cranky with you on the phone, Ryan, here for the next week or so, please understand. It's not personal. It's yeah,
you're getting rid of your caffeine addiction. I get it.
Yes, man. I am. Yeah. My Mountain Dew addiction.
I need some. I need people to start telling us who would play us in a movie as well, which would be fantastic.
I don't even. You do that, you're getting banned. I don't even want to know. I don't even want to know what people would say for that because it's just going to piss me off. So let's move on to another question. Irish Blooded says, do you expect Xavier Watts to stay at strong safety or maybe move to free safety? And would you have him starting at either? So real quick, they don't have a strong safety and a free safety. They have a field safety and a boundary safety. The reason that matters is because it's not a traditional free and strong safety role. Like this isn't like Steve Atwater, Dennis Smith, or that kind of thing. There's some level of interchangeableness to this. Mm-hmm. And that is one of those things that you kind of have to look at and say, see, this is exactly why I didn't want anyone to be given answers.
Someone said Tommy Reese is going to play me.
Yes. That's the same person who said you need to play Tommy Reese in a movie about Notre Dame.
Sure.
So, but anyway, TJ Stalika is trying to get banned. He's getting ready to come up with something, and just be careful. Be very careful.
I am 6'2", so I understand why they're saying this.
Yeah. You're in what? When you're wearing your wife's high heels? It's about the only way you're going to be 6'2". So anyway, but about the safety position, Ryan.
Yes.
He's field boundary. Thoughts on that? Just kind of understanding, kind of like, again, it's not free strong, but field boundary. My personal thought, Ryan, is I kind of like him to the field side because I think he can play. I think he can kind of play with a lot of space.
Yeah.
But I also think there's some merit to playing to the boundary because that's a position that's going to roll to the center a lot. And right now, I think he probably would play that a little bit better than some of the other guys, but personally, I like him more to the field. Just more rangy, more impact. Yes. Just cover a lot of ground is kind of where I prefer him to play.
Yeah, and I think you could really play off the versatility of Xavier Watts to the field. To your point, I do think that Notre Dame with what the safety room is right now, I kind of feel like it might be a little more interchangeable as far like if I'm thinking like if it's Ramon Henderson and Xavier Watts, for instance, right? Both those guys can rotate down, and then both of them are solid in the middle of the field. Nothing spectacular though, right? So I think that you're going to have a lot of too high alignments and then be able to rotate both ways, I think is kind of where you're going. But I agree with you. I think that to the field, especially because I'm thinking like Xavier Watts rotating to the field down and really getting involved. Like that's where I want him, because I think that he can kind of be that Tasmanian devil, Jamal Adams
showed
type.
A lot of range off the hash late in the year too. Like now he sometimes he took some angles to the ball that didn't let him actually get to the football, but like the pass he broke up that he almost picked off against USC, man, the range he showed on that play was really good. And the field safety, just like the field corner, has to be really rangy. Mm-hmm. And to me, he's the most that they have at that. I don't think Ramon is a natural free safety, but he's so long and rangy. I think you could kind of teach that to him. But Ramon's also pretty good playing the alley, which is why it's good that they play the way that they do, not sort of true free and strong, because nobody's a true free safety in this defense in the traditional sense, which I think is a cover 3 safety is kind of how I view a traditional free safety versus strong safety, right? And, when you're playing cover 2, cover 4, your safeties are kind of interchangeable, you know, and so they do play a lot of cover 1 though. And so somebody's going to have to kind of play that. And I think Ramon and DJ are probably the most experienced at it right now and make the most sense. I think Xavier could do it at a high level. It's just, you're just not playing to his best abilities. And he's the one guy at safety in Xavier that you've got to tailor more his role to what he does well, because I think he's the most impactful potentially at that position. And he started to show it because what was one of my predictions for the game was he would make 2 big plays on the football, and he did. Mm-hmm. He almost picked off that one ball, and then he had the pass break up in the end zone, which is a great play.
That was a great play.
And right before they had the fake for the touchdown. So
because I think Xavier Watts, you want to get involved in the action, right? Like that's my biggest thing. And if you're a true, so I'm thinking like let's go back to the true center fielder, free safety type, cover 3 heavy system, cover 1, whatever. That guy, I know people like to make a big deal about like the rangy plays that they do make, but more often than not, you don't want that guy to be on the screen, right? Like you don't want to notice him, because that means usually that they're doing their job right well. So for those guys at times, it's more about they're not going to make a mistake, right? Like they're going to be in the right position. They're going to force a short throw instead of taking, an outside vertical shot type of thing or down the seam. But for me, I want that guy that's going to get involved more to be a Xavier Watts, because I think his versatility can play in that role. I think he can be in the run game. I think he can run the alley, could work inside out, could do some man coverage underneath. I think he could just make some splash plays. So personally, field safety for me, but I do think it's a little bit interchangeable, obviously, in this defense.
Next, good question, Irish Blooded. Very good question. Next one from him. Which D lineman coming in do you think has the highest ceiling if they develop? And the correct answer here is Boubacar. I mean, we've said this before, that we did the superlatives, Ryan, for the 2023 class. And I think, I don't know if I said it in a show or if I said it in that article, but to me, he might have, I mean, I'm just trying to think of this, Ryan. I would argue that he might have the highest ceiling of anyone in the class on defense, in my view. And I'm trying to see if we had that, if it was in a highest upside. Yeah, I said Boubacar is where I went with that one. And then best NFL prospect, I said the same thing. Like I went with Drake. I said, but if Boubacar reaches his ceiling, Boubacar has big time ability, like day 2 NFL draft pick ability, in my opinion, if not day 1. But day 1's a long way away from where he is right now, and we've just seen so little film of him. But I mean, you can't teach 6'4", 250. You can't teach that burst he shows off the line. He's a pretty decent lateral athlete, and he is insanely long, insanely long. Like he has all the God-given tools to be a star. It's just where he is now and where he needs to get to is a pretty long road. How quickly he gets there is going to determine just how early and how good he can be as a football player. But Ryan, it's not really debatable for me when I think about who has the highest ceiling on the D line. I think he has the highest ceiling of anyone on the defensive class last year. So definitely the defensive line.
See, I mean, I
for me,
know.
again, when I say debatable, it's just my opinion. It can be debated by others. Sure. Just for me, there's no internal debate going on with who that is. I just make sure I'm clear when I say it's not debatable. I'm not saying no one else can have a different opinion. I'm saying for me, it's not really debatable.
Understood.
For myself.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say that I think that, there's a conversation that could happen for me with Armel Mukum. Like, I think I could have that conversation because, look, man, he's raw as can be. But, like, all the things that you just said about Boubacar, I could use in place of Armel Mukum, right? I mean, he's also 6'4", 250-something. He's also insanely long. He's explosive. I think that's a theme that you have on the defensive line just in general. I mean, because Brendan Vernon's no slouch in those terms either, right? Like, I mean, you have a lot of really talented, athletic, physical dudes in the 2023 class at the defensive line. But development needs to be there, right? Because there's a possibility that none of them pan out. But there's a possibility that if only a couple, then you're great, you're in a good spot.
And we just mentioned 3 of the 4 defensive linemen. It wouldn't shock me if Devin Houston makes us look stupid for not mentioning him in this conversation in 4 years. And
he might play the most early of that 4. Like, it's possible.
Right.
Yeah.
All 4 of those guys, to me, have the tools to end up being the best of the class. All 4 of them do.
That's fair.
Just for me, it was more of if they all reach their peak, here's who I think is the best.
Sure.
Right. And that's where
I'll say this. I had a preconceived notion of Brendan Vernon going into the All-American Bowl because I expected him to be 285 pounds, right? Something like that. Seeing him at 260 something, he looked a lot more explosive than what I anticipated, man. So, I mean, he's got length. He's explosive. I mean, we can't not mention Brendan Vernon, man. I think he's got substantial upside.
I'm really glad he lost weight.
Yes.
Because he put on bad weight to get up to 280. He was up to 290 at one point.
He even said that. He said that he put on weight way too fast. Like, his body can handle it, but you need to naturally put that weight on.
That weight needs to be put on by Matt Bayless, not Brendan at home. That's my point.
Yep.
And so let Matt Bayless put that on him over the next 2 years, and he could be really good. And that's the thing is, like, that could be a really good D-line class.
Could be.
It's just, what does it play best as? 3-3-5, 4 down, multiple. That's the question.
It looks like a 3-man front to me. Like, I mean, that length, man. Could you imagine a couple of those guys as those based ends, and then you have like a Devin Houston at nose who's up at like 295, 300 at some point? Like, that's the ideal in my opinion, but we'll see how it all fills out, I guess.
Yeah. Here's a question, Ryan, from Seth Clark. Seth says, who are your favorite players at each position for next season? So let's define favorite somehow, Ryan. And Seth, if you're still listening and you want to quickly put in what you mean by favorite, please do. But Ryan, let's kind of define what we mean by favorite. So favorite in the context of this, what do we want to say, Ryan?
Most
not
excited
like from a fan's favorite, but the guy that, boy, I really think this guy could make the biggest impact next year. How about that? Okay. And then if Seth responds with what he means by favorite, then we'll answer that version too. So how about that?
Yeah, that sounds good.
So I just want to respond real quick. Somebody just kind of had the same thing. Somebody said two good examples for Harry Heastand in the movie. Somebody said John Goodman. That's a really good one. I like that one. Somebody else said Joe Pesci has the mouth for Harry Heastand. So can we get John Goodman to play him and then have a Joe Pesci voiceover for that?
I think it needs to. I honestly just think it needs to be. It needs to be an animated movie with Joe Pesci as the voice. That's what I think.
There you go. There you go.
Gosh.
CGI.
Yes. Oh, man. That's so funny. That's so funny. But for this one, you said
to the question. Sorry.
Yeah. So what was the criteria you said again? I just want to make sure that
just kind of like the guy that. But boy, I really think this guy, man, if he can step up, man, I think he could have the biggest impact of the position.
Cool. Gotcha. Yep. Sounds good. I mean, quarterback, right? Is that where we're going to start? Is quarterback, sure. I guess, right? I mean, honestly, like for 2023, I have to go Sam Hartman. I gave it a thought for Tyler Buchner because it's like if he takes a massive step and he can stay healthy, like he's the most dynamic player in that room, in my opinion. But Sam Hartman is most impactful for 2023, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Same here for 2023, but I still want to go with Tyler because Tyler's still the guy that if the light goes on for Tyler Buchner, he can be a star. I just think he needs time, and I think I don't know if he thinks this, but I think if he's not the starter next year, I think it could be really good for him. Look how much growth he showed just sitting on the sidelines, not even being able to practice this past year.
No doubt.
So I am. And then running back.
Running back, I would actually probably go Jadarian Price for 2023, just because I think he can bring something that you just don't have enough of. Well, not enough of. You don't have a ton of in the running back room. That dynamic ability, if he's back healthy. Long term, I would probably go Jeremiah Love, but I'll go Jadarian Price, considering he's a sophomore. So
I'm going to go Chris Tyree because I feel like if you use him correctly, he's going to be a huge weapon that just makes everybody else around him. If you're using Chris Tyree correctly, I don't know how you defend a 21 personnel and 20 personnel in Notre Dame. I just don't know how you defend it, which then opens up these huge run lanes for Diggs and Estime because you're so panicked about how Chris Tyree is going to. I mean, look, Chris Tyree, despite not being used correctly, did you see how much South Carolina panicked whenever he went in motion?
Yep.
It was nuts. They were so scared of Chris Tyree in that game, which is kind of wild. But it just kind of tells me they saw enough. They watched what it tells me is they went all the way back and watched Carolina. They watched Cal. They saw a couple of the plays he did in the pass game late in the year. They watched him against Clemson where they were getting him outside, and they said, "Boy, if this guy, if they're going to do some things with this guy, they were panicked about him." And that's what set up two of Tyler Buckner's long runs were off of action with Chris Tyree going away. Yep. And it was just boy, man, they were really panicked about that. And you saw it early in the game when he got tackled for one of the plays that set up several big plays for Notre Dame in the game was a minus to Chris Tyree for 4 yards because they so overplayed that they were able to kind of blow him up and oh my God, did you see them completely vacate the backside? Completely vacated the backside of the line of scrimmage, and they came back with a couple quarterback counters off of that were wide open. Because they were so overplaying Chris Tyree. So my whole thing is, imagine how teams would have to defend him if you were actually using him in the right way. All of a sudden you're like, dude, Audric Estime had 165 yards, but then you're going to look at, it's like I've pointed to the 2017 USC game where Josh Adams is 80-yard touchdown run, but the reason is because 3 dudes ran with Brandon Wimbush on the fake. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? It's just Alex Bars made a great block, but Josh Adams literally just ran straight up the field for 85 yards because a bunch of the defense ran with Brandon Wimbush. And so, to me, that was a special thing. So I'm going to go with him, Ryan. How about wide receiver?
I don't know why this one is this way, but I just have become such a Deion Colsey guy, man. I really have. I mean, he's 6'5", long arms, has a very athletic, springy athlete. And I felt that he really started to gain confidence down the stretch of the season. And I think if he is a confident Deion Colsey, I said this yesterday on the show, it's a scary thing, man. Yeah. It's a scary thing. When that kid is confident, he has all the tools to be an absolute difference maker. So I'd say Deion Colsey, I believe, in that room.
I'm going Tobias. That's a pretty easy one.
Yep.
Yeah. Let's go tight end.
I mean, it'd still be Eli Raritan for me. I really think so because, I mean, I know he's probably not going to be available for the first part of the season, right? Probably for a couple months. But when he gets back, I just think that he has a skill set that you just don't have a complete player like that in the room, right? I think you have Holden Stace, who could be a really nice receiving option, can block, but a really nice receiver. Mitchell Evans, I think, can do a little bit of everything at a pretty solid level. I think that you have Cooper Flanagan, who's going to be able to block from day one. But I think Eli Raritan just brings you something from an all-around skill set that you don't have a ton of. So whenever he gets back, I think it could be Eli if he's back healthy.
I don't know why. I can't put my finger on it. He didn't receive the highest grade in the class. There's a lot of things like that, but there's just something about Holden Stace that makes me really like that kid. Yep. Really like that kid. Offensive line, I'm curious about that one. Can I say mine first on this one?
Sure. Yep.
It's Billy Schrauth for me. Because we know what Joe Alton, Blake Fisher, and Zeke Correll are, correct? Right? This line is going to be determined by, does somebody step up at guard? Mm-hmm. And there's 2 guys that for some reason, non-freshmen, so I'm going to look at not freshmen. There's 2 guys coming back that for some reason just kind of intrigue me, and it's Billy Schrauth and Ty Chan. I don't know why, but those 2 guys are just if those 2 guys beat out everybody else, man, boy, this thing could get really scary good. Could you imagine? Because you and I talked about Charles Jagusah next to Blake Fisher.
Yeah.
But what about if it's Ty Chan next to Blake Fisher? Like, that's kind of a scary thing as well.
Yeah, it is. I think I would still, and because I think Billy would probably be my second answer here because, Joe Alt is just really good player, right? Like that's an easy one, right? I'm actually going to go with Blake Fisher though, for me, just because I still think we haven't seen nearly as good as what Blake Fisher could be, man. And we talked about this on this show yesterday. I think that, look, Zeke Correll, I think, is going to be a really good, solid center inside, right? Like, he's going to be a dependable player. Joe Alt, you already know what he is. Guards, I feel like you can kind of fit a couple good players inside, but they don't necessarily have to be stars, right? Like, you can find just good, solid contributors. Blake Fisher's the guy for me that turns his team from a great offensive line to an elite one, I think, like with his upside, because I think that Blake played well this year. I think he played good football.
For a sophomore.
Yeah. But there is a level that Blake Fisher can get to that we just have not seen yet. We've seen it in spurts. We haven't seen it from a full game. We haven't seen it from a full stretch of games for a season. We haven't seen it yet. So if Blake Fisher is able to take his game to the next level, I think that unlocks dynamic ability for an offensive line potentially. So I would go Blake Fisher for me. Defensive. So are we gonna break the line into two? Sorry.
Let me say something about the offensive line real quick.
Yes.
The reason why Blake's not my pick is just because I kind of expect that. Right? There's no anticipation to see Blake next year for me. It's just he's going to dominate next year. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's probably unfair. Honestly, I'll just be real about it. But when I think of offensive line, there's a level of assumption that Blake's going to take that step next year and be really good. So I agree with everything you said.
Yeah. But
that's kind of why, for me, it kind of went in a different direction, Ryan, because I kind of already expect that, right? I think everything you just said is true. If Blake ends up being the best of the two, of him and Alt, that won't shock me.
No.
It won't shock me at all, because his God-given ability to me is highest. It's just he has a longer way to go to get there than Joe Alt did, because the only thing that we had questions about with Joe Alt was, would he get big enough? Quick enough. He had a better frame than Emil Wagner, but he was like 240 as a junior. How long would it, Joe Alt is now what I thought he'd be like maybe next year, 2024. He just sped the process up big time.
It's wild how quickly it happens, man. I guess we shouldn't doubt it with him having a father that played in the NFL.
But see, that's why I never doubted the potential. It was just the body, how quickly the body would grow.
It's fair.
But you always knew the technique was going to be there. So that part doesn't surprise me. With Blake, you knew that there was going to need to be some time before he mastered that part. Mm-hmm. But Blake Fisher in year 2 of Harry Eastan, and then if God forbid, I feel really bad for college football if for some reason you get 3 years of Blake Fisher playing for Harry Eastan, because year 3 under Harry Eastan has been the money year for so many players.
Yeah.
And that might be the thing. Look, I'm going to say this. Don't be shocked that if Joe Alt doesn't get a top 10 NFL draft grade next year, don't be shocked if he comes back for a 5th, 4th year. Because Quentin Nelson did it. Yeah. Ronnie Stanley did it. Ronnie Stanley went from a late first-round pick in 2000 after 2014 to top 10 in 2015 because of that 3rd year with Harry. So he had 13, 14, and 15. And we saw that from a lot of dudes. Quentin Nelson did 15, 16, and 17. Quentin Nelson would have been a pretty high draft pick after 2016. He's an All-American, and he was really good in 2015. He would have been probably a first-round draft pick after 2016. But he knew he needed that 3rd year to become a star.
Sure.
And like that has been the money year for so many different players. And so if those guys decide to come back for 2024 –
could you imagine if both, because then Zeke will be back too, and then Billy with a year potentially, and who knows what the other
there's a slim chance that all 5 of those guys are back in 2024.
That's wild.
But if it happens, but to me there's a level of assumption there with Blake is really the key.
Sure.
So Ryan, you're going to take over the rest of this for a minute.
Yep. So I'm going to break up. Actually, I'm not going to break up. I'm just going to talk defensive line, linebacker, corner, and safety, I think is the best way to do this. And for people in the chat, if you want to keep throwing in your picks for each of these positions, that'll be awesome, right? So defensive line-wise, this is an interesting one because I feel like there's a billion answers that you can come up with. Literally, if we said if you told me Joshua Burnham's your pick, right, to be that guy because he just has so much God-given ability, I would say, okay, makes sense. Jordan Botelho, who quietly was second on the team in sacks this year, right, with 4.5. If he's your guy as a breakout star, I would be like, yep, I get that, right? If it's an interior guy, if it's a Tyson Ford, I think that there's a lot of different scenarios that you could do here, a lot of different players that you could pick on the defensive line to say, if that guy breaks out, he takes my team to another level, to a much higher level. That's so, but for me, I'm going to go with Jordan Botelho, actually, which might be a surprise to some people because I was wrestling between Joshua Burnham and Riley Mills and Jordan Botelho. Those are the three because I think that what Riley Mills brings to the table from an inside-outside perspective could be very impactful for the team because we haven't seen the best of Riley Mills. I think that we need to remember that, right? Like we haven't seen the best of what he can be, in my opinion. Joshua Burnham's a wild card. He was a linebacker recruit, transitioned to Viper almost immediately when he got to Notre Dame, and he has been developing and filling out. And I'll tell you this, we saw a picture of him next to Isaiah Foskey. So I saw someone in the chat earlier said he's 6'3", 233 pounds or so. That may have been true when Joshua Burnham first got to Notre Dame, but there was a picture of him standing next to Isaiah Foskey after their award banquet, and he was right there with them seemingly, right? Like I would guess that Joshua Burnham is a good 6'4" plus at this point. And weight-wise, I mean, I would say he's probably 240 plus pounds at this time, right? So we'll see what the weight looks like when a game comes around. But I think that Joshua Burnham has substantial upside. I didn't think that if you threw in an Aiden Gabira, that would make a lot of sense because he's the longest of the defensive ends. He has maybe the best pass rush plan, at least from what we saw as a high school senior. But for me, I went with Jordan Botelho just because I think that what you've seen from Jordan with how this defense is going, when he's played this past year, he was productive. He's had games where you're just like, Jordan Botelho quietly had 2 sacks, right? Like you think about what he did in the bowl game against South Carolina. And if this team is moving more to a 3-3-5 type of alignment, Jordan has had experience at defensive end. He's had experience at linebacker. He's even had experience at rover at Notre Dame. So having that full complement and that arsenal, I think could be really intriguing for 2023. So Jordan Botelho will be my pick as far as the favorite player, as we're coining it, as a guy that could be most impactful potentially and maybe take the position to the next level. Linebacker-wise, it's an easy one for me, man. Jalen Sneed. And I wanted to honestly think about one of the freshmen coming in because I think that they can assume a role, but I think it's Jalen Sneed just because for what the rover position has been at Notre Dame over the last couple of years, it's been a good, solid, steady player. But I think historically, you start thinking about what Jeremiah Wusu-Koromo was able to do at the rover position, what Drew Tranquil did before he transitioned to will linebacker his final year. The rover position could be a highly impactful playmaking position for this defense. And I believe that Jalen Sneed has about as much upside as any linebacker on the team. And the rover position is one that needs to be upgraded, right? That position, from a production perspective, needs to get better. Will linebacker needs to get better. So in that instance, I think that you look at a player like a Jalen Sneed and say, if he can take the next step, if he can maybe fight for a starting role, assume a starting role, and hit near his athletic upside, Jalen Sneed could have a tremendous impact in 2023. So give me Jalen Sneed on the second level. Cornerback-wise, people are probably going to think this is kind of wild that I'm going to say this, but Cam Hart is my pick for cornerback, and I'll tell you why. I actually think that we have a little bit more of a known commodity in Benjamin Morrison, which sounds weird because Benjamin Morrison is coming off of a freshman year. But you saw the impact he can have as a true freshman All-American, 6 interceptions. During the course of the end of the season, you saw the impact that he can have as a true man cover corner. I still don't think in the case of Cam Hart that we've seen nearly as good as what Cam Hart can be. I really don't think we have. We've seen spurts of it. Think of Wisconsin 2021. Think of a couple games last year. I think of Syracuse was one where they just did not test Cam Hart, and he almost had a near pick 6 in that football game as well. Cam Hart, for me, if he is able to stay healthy and to hit near his upside, combining that with what you now think we have with Benjamin Morrison, that's going to take the position from a very good level to that top 5 elite level that I talked about earlier in this podcast. So give me Cam Hart at corner. I think that he's the one that makes sense, that he can make the giant step forward despite being now a 5th-year senior. And then safety-wise, Xavier Watts is my guy. He is. I'm planting my flag early on with Xavier just because I think that a couple of the freshmen have a chance to play. Like if Ben Minnick came in and played football, I wouldn't be shocked. If Don Schuler came in and played football, I wouldn't be shocked. If Ramon Henderson had a nice impact, I wouldn't be shocked, right? Like they're all good players. But for me, what I saw down the course of the later stretch of the season, I really believe that Xavier Watts can kind of be that Swiss Army knife on the back end of a defense. You know, I keep talking about Jamal Adams a little bit, but if you remember Jamal Adams when he was with LSU, he was used all over the place. And I'm not comparing the two because Jamal Adams went top 10 overall in the NFL draft. I'm not saying that about Xavier Watts. But what I am saying is that I believe that Xavier Watts has the type of upside where he can be a Swiss Army knife for a defense, that he can do a little bit of everything. He can come down in the box at times. He can run the alley. He can work inside and out. He can do some man coverage stuff. He can play over the top. I think he can do a little bit of everything. So he would be my pick at safety. And maybe we'll try to get Brian's when he hops back in here in a couple minutes. But those are kind of some of my superlatives for the 2023 season. Wanted to now, and great question, by the way, wanted to move to Irish Blooded's question, who said, would you rather see Hillman, Brandon Hillman, 2023 athletes out of Churchland High School in the state of Virginia as a nickel cornerback or more as a linebacker that drops in the pass coverage? So Irish Blood, it's a nuanced answer because it's a little of both, if we're being completely honest, right? So Brandon Hillman, for me, ideally into a system, I think – so he's going to play safety early on in his career by all accounts, right? So he was, and Brian talked about this earlier, he was kind of the not insurance, because he was going to be a take for Notre Dame no matter what. But they always knew that in case something went south with Peyton Bowen, Brandon Hillman could play safety. He could play those types of things. So I think ideally for Notre Dame, they're going to play him as kind of that field safety early, and they're going to, be that guy that comes down into the box, physicality, do that type of work. But I honestly would not be shocked, and I've been on this from day one with Brandon Hillman, I would not be surprised if eventually, as the safety room gets a little more depth, if Brandon Hillman's the guy that you say, you're the rover now, man. At 6'1", as I said, 191 pounds, but I think he's going to be 205 very solidly, maybe 210. He might be more that modern rover that Notre Dame is looking for in their system. So I think that he is early on probably a field safety with the ability to rotate down. But ideally, for me, long-term, I still think Rover is a destination that could make a ton of sense, man. He is a physical kid. He's got really nice short area quickness. I don't think he's the fastest straight-line athlete of all time, but short area, he is explosive. Turn on his film, play an option quarterback in high school, you can see that explosiveness in short areas. So short areas, physicality, I think that that's the things about Brandon Hillman that really pop out to me. So I think ultimately down the line, he's maybe as a rover. But again, the need for safety early on, I think, is there. So we'll see. All right. And then we had, well, I kind of answered this question already, but I wanted to pull it up. We had Irishman 7414 and just said, mailbag, do we know for sure where Hillman is going to start his career? We do. And I just wanted to kind of reiterate it for people that weren't in the podcast earlier. So originally, if Peyton Bowen would have stuck in the class for Notre Dame, I think that there would have been a real conversation between the staff on, do we want to start him at Rover? Do we want him to play him on the offensive side of the football? It was an open conversation, to be completely transparent. They didn't 100%, I don't think, know exactly where they want to start with Brandon in his career. So there was a little bit of a jockeying thing that was going to happen. But with the need, obviously, now with Peyton Bowen not in the class, and you have Adon Schuler and Ben Minnick in the class, right? Brandon Hillman, to our understanding, is going to start his career as a safety. And then from there, as roster development happens, player development happens, we'll see if he ends up at a different position. But I think safety early on is definitely the spot that Brandon Hillman is going to play. So that is, yep. Then we had a question from John A1. What's up, John? Mailbag. Does Alexander Ahrensberger have a higher ceiling than Nana Osafo-Mensah? Is there a reason they went away from him injured? So, John, hopefully Brian gets back in because I'll let him speak to the injury part. Because to my knowledge, I don't think Alexander Ahrensberger dealt with an injury this year. I think he played a lot on special teams. But I can answer to the point of who has a higher upside. And to me, it's pretty clear, and it's no disrespect to Nana Osafo-Mensah, but Alexander Ahrensberger, I think we've seen it, right, in the brief flashes on defense over the last couple of years. Alexander Ahrensberger is a super long, athletic kid, right? We know the background coming from Germany and everything, but, I mean, my guy is right around 6'7", hair underneath, 260 pounds now, 255, 260, somewhere in that ballpark. He's got length for days, and he's straight line explosive. I don't think that Ahrensberger is necessarily the change of direction dude. Like, I don't think he's the bendiest guy of all time, but as a big end, man, he's explosive and he is long. Nana, for me, Nana is more of a low ceiling, high floor type of player because Nana is a really solid football player, man. He's going to set a firm edge. He's going to play his butt off, plays with a great motor, all those things that you love about Nana. But I think, honestly, if both players hit their ceiling, Nana he's ideally a rotational player as a big end, right? Like, he's going to stop the run. He's going to set a firm edge. He's going to play hard. All those things are great, but I don't think he has tremendous upside to the position. Alexander Ahrensberger was the ultimate boomer bust type of player. I think that he has a lot of athletic gifts that you want to work with, that you want to develop. But there was also obviously always a part of the conversation where if he doesn't hit his ceiling, he might never be a substantial player at Notre Dame. And I think we're nearing kind of that understanding of which one we're really trending towards. And it's 3 years now. We haven't seen a ton of them. We've only seen spurts. But honestly, I think that the coaching staff this year, and we can have a conversation of whether this is right or wrong, because I think we saw it at linebacker as well. I think that they went a little more with the known commodity, a little more with the dependability, because Nana does have a higher floor than Alexander. I do, but I would say imminently, without hesitation in my voice, I think Ahrensberger has a much higher ceiling than Nana Osafo-Mensah, or at least pretty substantially higher ceiling. But I think that the floor is what gives you, it lets you sleep easier at nights to know that Nana is a solid rotational player. You don't have to worry about the peaks and valleys with Alexander Ahrensberger. You might never get the peaks with Nana Osafo-Mensah, but you get the steadiness. So coaches tend to fall towards the known commodity, towards the floor at times, right? So that's what I just kind of think there is that I think Alexander definitely has a higher ceiling, but I think substantial floor with a guy like Nana Osafo-Mensah. We had this question from MT41 mailbag. If Caleb Smith reaches his ceiling, what kind of player is he at Notre Dame? I remember a while ago you said that Braylon James is an NFL receiver if he's developed correctly. Is Caleb Smith the same? And obviously, we're talking about Caleb Smith, the 2023 wide receiver out of Reedy High School in Frisco, Texas. We're not talking about the grad transfer from Virginia Tech. Brian, you want to get us kicked off with this one?
I want to say something to you, and I want you to tell me if you think I'm nuts or not.
Okay.
I'm not saying he's going to be as good of a player, because
Sure.
That would be unfair to say about a high school kid. He reminds me so much of Chris Olave as an athlete and body type.
It's interesting.
And ball skills, because he catches the ball away from his body. He reminds me a lot of Chris Olave. Am I off base there? A guy that could play outside, but also I really love in the slot. Am I off base there?
I don't think so, because we've talked to a lot of people about Caleb Smith just in the past, right? And the one thing people rave about, and I think we see it on film, is that he has a real attention to detail as a route runner, which is, that's what Chris Olave made his ceiling on. And one thing that someone told me, I think it was actually his trainer, told me that Caleb Smith is also, he's a lot faster than you originally anticipate. It kind of catches you off guard a little bit. And I think that was Chris Olave, man. Like, I don't think Chris Olave was like just this stupid fast kid no matter what, right? Like, I think that he kind of caught you off guard a little bit. So I don't think it's off base. I think that Chris is probably a little taller, slightly longer than Caleb Smith. But as far as working inside and out, being a route runner, and then having that deceptive speed, I think it makes sense. Sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. That's kind of how I see it. I think I think he could be an NFL guy if he matches it right. I think all four of the receivers in that class can play
I
in
was
the
going to
NFL to
say, I
some
think
degree
all of them have that
if they
upside.
pan out.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they all will. The odds of four guys in one class all panning out and being NFL players, we've seen that once at Notre Dame, and that was the 2016 defensive line class, right? And one of those four guys wasn't drafted, correct? Right? Because so Dalen made it as a draftee.
Yes.
No, four guys did get drafted. A fifth guy made it as an undrafted free. So Dalen, Khalid, Adi, and because Dalen Hayes, Julian Aguara, all four of them. That's so rare for four guys at one position in one draft class, one recruiting class to get drafted.
And they all went fifth round or higher too, didn't they? Like that was, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe Khalid went sixth round, but yeah, that was pretty wild. I mean, I think I agree with you though, Brian. I mean, I 100% agree on you on the sense of if all of Jaden Greathouse, Braylon James, Caleb Smith, and Rico Flores, if they all hit near their ceilings, they're all NFL caliber kids, in my opinion. There's no doubt about it. And but yeah, I think that the comparison that you made with Caleb Smith is interesting because I think he does have some inside out ability. I mean, I think we all just kind of pencil him in as a slot receiver, but he might be able to play both field spots, right? Like he has kind of that upside to him. So it's interesting. Right. We're moving down to, thank you again for that question. Awesome question. Brian, here's an interesting one. Irish Blooded said, if you manage the at Notre Dame NIL, what sponsorship would you go after to really embody the Notre Dame defense as a unit?
Oh, gosh.
Think of like a hardware store, man. Get your hard hats on. I don't know.
Yeah.
Home Depot? Man. Can Home Depot sponsor
what's Home Depot's logo? Isn't like what's Home Depot's like?
Isn't there like a hammer and something in like the
I mean, like they have like a statement, right? Like some kind of
their slogan or whatever.
Yeah, slogan. Yeah, that's what I'm looking for. What's their slogan? I don't know. I'm not. How doers get more done.
I don't hate it. I don't hate it.
Something about I want something that's going to be super aggressive, super intense, super physical. I mean, it would be something like, it'd have to be something. It'd have to be something like, is there like a big hammer company? Like, who makes the best hammers? Right? Who makes the best chainsaws or something? Like, it'd be something like that. It'd have to be something like that.
Yeah.
I'd rather do something for like groups. I think it's a lot easier to do. Number one, I could get more money for kids,
like the Mission Barbecue offensive line thing.
Yeah, because for me, like if I'm answering this question like honestly, right? Like it's kind of a fun question, but if I were to answer kind of honestly, I'd say if I'm going to push for NIL deals for my players, obviously there's going to be some individual players getting deals, but the other part of it, Ryan, is I'm going to look at it and say, I think group wise. So if I can get, it's kind of like I made this. My wife and I were having a conversation about hiring somebody. And so I'm going to post a job for an editor here soon. And she was talking about how, well, what if you can't find one person that does? I said, well, that's not ideal because if I were going to pay 3 people to do one person's job, the odds of them all being okay with the small enough salary to do that one job is probably not going to be likely. I'm going to have to pay each of them more to get them to do that job. So I'm hiring 3 people to do one job, which might make for a more efficiency, but I'm going to have to pay a lot more for it.
Right.
Because I'm hiring 3 people instead of 1. And that doesn't make a lot of business sense if it's a job that one person should be able to handle. And it's the same thing kind of there. It's like, do I want one company to give me a dollar amount that covers everybody? Or do I find 5 companies to sponsor each position group, knowing that I could probably get more? They're going to be, to each company is giving me actually less. So the odds of me getting that from them is more. But as I put it all together, my entire unit is making more because it's not just one company. So, for example, I'm going to the offensive line. I said this before, like the 2023 recruiting class. If IHOP or some kind of pancake company does not give those guys a sponsorship, you're not doing this whole thing right. You know what I mean? Like, so it'd be stuff like that. I think that would be better to find something, so that's what I would want to do. Like my receivers, I'd try to get some airline. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like some kind of airline. Although right now I don't know an airline that's reputation is strong enough for that. Would make a lot of sense right now. But the Southwest calls. No, I'm good right now, guys. I'm good. You guys need to save that money and go, update your computer system. But that's what I would do. Honestly, is I would try to find something kind of fun and gimmicky that fit each of my guys, each of my groups, and try to do it that way. I think financially that would make a lot more sense because, more companies giving a little bit more than they would if you took one company and averaged it out over 5 positions. So let's say I could raise a company, give me $1 million to sponsor my entire defense. So then there's 4 positions on defense. I'd have a better chance, I think, of finding 4 companies or 3 companies that are all going to give me $400,000 to do one to do the D line, one to do the linebackers, one to do the secondary. Well, that's $1.2 million as opposed to $1 million. That's kind of the way I look at it. So, but yeah, I think, but that'd be fun. Like if we were doing that one day, like what would be the group to sponsor each of these guys? You know what I mean? Like that'd be kind of fun. That'd be kind of fun. Somebody needs to get Audric Estime like some kind of sledgehammer.
Seriously,
like whatever. Like if you're a company out there and you do sledgehammers and you are not an NIL partnership with Audric Estime, you are just not good at advertising.
Or how about like an axe throwing company that just makes him dress up like a lumberjack or something like that? Like it'd be fantastic, man.
I mean, does he not already do that? I don't know. He may.
He probably does.
I mean,
he probably does.
Like that's a scary dude, and he plays fun though, right? Like he's got a really fun style of play. Like like the way he did that first down thing against South Carolina was just like, dude, that guy's got some style to him. You know what I mean? Like he's not just some big hammer. He's got some style to him.
He's hysterical in all those like karaoke things they do and stuff. Like he's so bad, but it's so funny.
I want to see Christian Gray and Audric Estime in the worst karaoke battle ever. It'd be so much fun.
I might put that on Twitter and tag both those guys. Be like, we need a karaoke off, man.
It'd be so much fun. We did have a super chat down here, Ryan, from Charlie Weiss's Last Belt Loop. You want to go ahead and read that?
Sure. Yeah, from Charlie. IB, it feels like Coach Washington is just going for low-hanging fruit. Not the dogs you need that can come in and ball out immediately. Like Bryce Young is pretty overrated because of his dad.
Here's my thing on Bryce Young. He's not overrated because he's rated very low.
Yeah. Is he like a 3-star?
Yeah, he's, I believe, a consensus 3-star. And I'm going to be honest with you. You can't ignore who his dad is.
Can't. Yeah.
Just like Notre Dame was wise, I guess – On 3 ranks Bryce Young as the number 103 player in the country. Okay.
That's wild, man. That's wild. Come on, guys.
But here's the thing. Just like with Joe Alt, if you would have ignored who Joe Alt's dad was, you would not have thought as highly of Joe Alt when he was 230 pounds as you did. That was – look, I've been very hard on Jeff Quinn. That was one of the best evaluations and recruitments he's ever made.
Yeah.
Because they didn't – like they had lost somebody – when they turned to Joe, but he wasn't like some plan B guy. They just kind of discovered him and was like, hey, let's go get this guy. So I'll give him a lot of credit for that one. So with Bryce Young, you can't ignore that his dad is Bryant Young. And forget that he played at Notre Dame. This is true if he'd have played anywhere. Because you look at a kid, because Bryant Young came to Notre Dame as a linebacker.
Did he really?
Wow. I'm almost positive. I got the recruiting class rankings up here. I'll go find it. But you can't just ignore that and pretend like DNA doesn't matter because it does. Here's what I look at when I see Bryce Young. I see a kid that's very tall, very skinny, pretty good athlete for his size. But he's very skinny. But he's got humongous feet and humongous hands and pretty broad shoulders. And then I look at his dad and I'm like, there's some DNA there that's gonna make me think that kid's gonna end up growing to a monster football player, not a basketball player.
Right.
And so that to me is kind of an aspect of it where I look and say, you can't ignore the DNA there. If you can take 4 or 5 defensive linemen in this class, I'm all about taking Bryce Young. It is okay to take those kind of kids. What you can't do is only take those kind of kids.
Right.
But
and I mean, could I just say real quick, Brian? I sorry to cut you off, but
I'm
going
to get pissed at someone for cutting somebody off. Are you serious? Have you watched me do a show before, Ryan?
Well, no, we had this discussion on the message board. You should go sign up at boards.irishbreakdown.com, by the way, about the defensive line recruiting class, and people hyper focus on the couple 3-stars that are on the board. I'm like, guys, that's not the only players on the board, though. That's not the only players that they're recruiting. Like, I agree that it needs to get better. Like, there's no doubt about it.
Right.
But can we not? I'm not saying this to Charlie. specifically, but I'm saying Bryce Young isn't the number one Viper on their board, right? Like that's not where we're at with this situation. Like that's why you make a board. It's not just it's not a panel, right? Like it's a board that's made up. So this isn't a situation where it's like, we're only going to take Bryce Young and then these 3 other projects, hopefully, right? Like that's not the situation you're in.
Right. The other thing too, Ryan, and that's a great point to make. Here's another thing about Bryce Young is I just looked it up. His dad was 6'3", 246 pounds coming out of high school.
Mm-hmm.
So he was listed as a linebacker. 6'3", 240 pounds. He finished his NFL. How big was he listed as when he played in his NFL career?
He had to be 290 something. He had to be 290 something.
So, to me, my whole thing is when you see a kid with that kind of frame, that's a guy that's got some ability, right? That's a guy that's got some size to him. And so he was listed at 6'3", 305.
He's a big guy, man.
So you shouldn't ignore that, number one. Number two, he's not your top guy in the class. Number three, somebody made a reference to Ron Paulus. This is a completely different situation. Different situation, because Ron Paulus was not a Division I football prospect outside of Notre Dame giving him a scholarship. In MAC schools weren't even pushing all that hard for him. And so that's just the thing is, this is a completely different kid. This is a kid that's got a lot of ability. He's just raw. And so there's a reason. Okay, you could say, okay, well, Notre Dame's only offering him because of who his dad is. Okay, why did Tennessee offer him? Why did Duke offer him? He's got Power 5 offers outside of Notre Dame.
Right.
And there's a reason for that. And so to me, Ryan, I am totally fine. Would encourage them to take Bryce Young, to be honest with you. Because if he pans out, boy, he's going to have a chance to be a really good football player. And if he doesn't, other guys won't pan out. You could get a 5-star who may not pan out, right?
Yep.
So take that chance on him. Just make sure that you build the rest of the class around him properly.
I was going to say, you need to couple it with the big-time players with the developmental players, right? Like that's the biggest thing. Because
Bryce Young, to me, is no different than Joe Otting, to me, right? As far as how I look at him. Do I want a class of 5 Joe Ottings? No, I don't, because there's always a risk of those guys being able to get to the proper size needed to play the game at a high level, even though I like the film. Joe Otting is a little bit more advanced, but same with Ashton Craig. Those guys are like, I'm just not sure if this guy's going to pan out. But you can't, to me, you can't deny the size. You can't deny the frame. You can't deny the athletic ability for that size. And you can't deny the genes. And the difference between the genes of him and the genes of Ron Paulus is, number one, the film is completely different. Completely 100%. Different.
Yep.
And number two, one was an elite athlete. The other was a quarterback. You don't have to be an elite athlete to be a quarterback. And Ron Paulus, the second, was not an elite athlete. He was a really good high school quarterback, and I think would have been a much better college quarterback without the 2 collarbone injuries, and had he gone to a different school. Had he gone to Penn State, I think his career turns out totally differently, because he'd have played in a system that fit what he did. Lou Holtz never built around Ron Paulus the way he said he was going to. Mm-hmm. And so, but it's a different situation where Bryant Young was an elite pound-for-pound athlete. I mean, he was an elite player. An elite player.
Yes.
So, yeah, I'm totally fine taking Bryce Young. You just don't make a whole roster of Bryce Youngs. That's 100%. The thing.
I just saw Charlie had a comment that he just said, isn't Wayful, that's Owen Wayful, 2024 defensive lineman out of the Hun School in Princeton, New Jersey. Isn't he already a project to a point? I would actually say he's the complete opposite. I think his floor is substantially higher.
I was getting ready to say the same. I think he has the highest floor that they've signed on the defensive line in 2 years.
Yeah.
He's got a higher floor than anyone in the 2014-23 class, except arguably Devin Houston. Mm-hmm. And he's got a higher floor than anyone in the 2022 class, including Tyson Ford, which is Tyson Ford, Andy Byron, Josh Burnham, floor-wise. Right. To me, Owen Wayful, to me, is Kurt Heinisch type of player.
Maybe a more explosive Kurt Heinisch, right?
Like the impact. Different position types. He's more of a 3 technique, maybe a nose, but he's more quick and powerful. Kurt was just a different type of player, but like role-wise is where I'm coming from, right? Role-wise.
Yep.
In an ideal world, Kurt Heinisch is your number 2, is coming off the bench. At Georgia, Kurt Heinisch is coming off the bench. And a really good player coming off the bench for you.
Mm-hmm.
But at Notre Dame, he had to be a starter. right? That's the difference. And Owen Wafel is a guy that I view that way as, boy, if you got Owen Wafel coming in off the bench, you're getting a strong, technically sound, high motor kid that can play 2 different inside spots. And it could even play some 4-eye, Ryan, if they go to a 3 down, right?
Yes.
I love kids like that. But that's got to be the floor of your class, right, from that standpoint. So if you give me – but to Charlie's point, and here's where this is a fair thing to bring up, Charlie, is if you're going to take Owen Wafel, high floor, low ceiling, and then you're going to take Bryce Young, high ceiling, low floor, your next 2 to 3 defensive linemen in this class better be pretty good combos of floor plus. So you better give me a TJ Lindsey, who I think is another very high floor player, because I view TJ Lindsey as a nose tackle. And I think he could be a really good nose tackle. Agreed. You better give me an Elijah Rushing. You better give me the Smith twins plus a guy like that. You better give me Justin Scott. You better give me guys like that to fill out the rest of the class.
Sure.
Is the way that I look at it. So
no doubt.
Yeah. Ryan, real quick, where are you on the did you get to John A1's question about Tyson Ford?
I've been unstarring everything, so we're still
okay. I wanted to ask you. I'm going to give a couple that I want you to answer, and then a couple that I'm going to take
sure.
and I want to get to. But I wanted to get your thoughts on this one, Ryan, from John A1. What should be expected of Tyson Ford in 2023?
I mean, I think ideally you saw it last year during the spring that Tyson Ford has all the tools, but he's still a player that needs to mature, right? Like you saw that. I think ideally, though, John, I would hope that Tyson Ford fights for some reps as a big end in this system. And then if he acclimates properly quick enough, I wouldn't be surprised if he's a interior rusher on obvious passing situations. Like I think he could be that type of player. But I mean, Brian, honestly, as a sophomore, as a redshirt freshman, however you want to calculate Tyson Ford, I think fighting for reps as a big end is what you ideally would want to see, because he's got a high ceiling. He's a very talented football player. And I think that that's a position where, especially if you're starting to use Riley Mills maybe a little more inside, to work with guys like Nano Asafa-Mensah. Like I want to see Tyson Ford get some type of reps during the season.
I'm not in the point yet where he has to step up now, but I really need to see him kind of force his way onto the field this year. I do. Because he's got a lot of ability. Just got an email, Ryan. Notre Dame has announced that the Blue Gold game will be played on April 22nd. Just got that email from Notre Dame Communication. So that game is going to be on April 22nd is when Notre Dame will be playing the Blue Gold game. So they have not tickets will go on sale Tuesday, January 24th at 10 a.m. So it will obviously be played in Notre Dame Stadium. So, and it will be aired on Peacock. So prepare yourselves to be frustrated with the coverage of the
go to the game.
Yes.
Go to the game if you
be on Peacock. If you don't want to watch it on Peacock, Ryan is right. Then get to the stadium and watch the game. So absolutely right. Ryan, I want to get back to this other conversation because the 2 things I want to respond to in regard to some of the things being mentioned when we're talking about the Bryce Young example and some of these guys. Number 1, give me a Jason Onye type player every year. Just don't give me 2 every year. Don't give me 3 every year. Give me an Alex Ahrensberger and Jason Onye type, Bryce Young type. Give me one of those guys every year. The problem that Notre Dame has had is they've had to rely too much on those guys to pan out, because they've had so many misses at in other spots in that class. Number 1. So because the thing is, there's going to be the more low floor guys you bring with high ceilings, the higher the bust rate is going to be. Low floor guys bust out higher because there's so much room and there's so much projection to what they're going to do. And sometimes they don't get to where you think they're going to get to. There have been guys that have come in that had body types. I'm like, there's no way that guy's going to fill out. And he does. And then other guys are like, I'm sure that guy's going to fill out, and he never gets the weight. He doesn't carry it well, because there is a projection to that you think that he's going to do this. It's not an exact science. And so that's the thing, is they rely too much on those guys. And that to me is why I think it's important when you look at a guy like Bryce Young. Why do you recruit him? Because there are tools to work with. You don't give me 4 Bryce Youngs, because it's hard for me to build a roster year after year after year with those many projects, because some of them aren't going to pan out. Somebody else said, well, you can take these guys, but Georgia and Alabama aren't taking these guys. Number 1, that's completely inaccurate. Okay, they take 3 stars every year. Number 2, Notre Dame can't recruit like Georgia and Alabama. They can't. So stop saying, well, Georgia and Alabama don't do that, because it doesn't matter. You know who else didn't recruit like Georgia and Alabama but kick their you-know-whats all the time? Clemson. Because Clemson said, we can't recruit like Georgia and Alabama. So let me go find an Isaiah Simmons, because I can't beat Bama for a 5-star kid from Florida. So let me go out to Kansas, find this 3-star Isaiah Simmons kid, and turn him into a star.
Yeah.
And occasionally I'm going to get my big-time players and all that kind of stuff. But let me go find those kind of guys. Let me go find a Mike Williams. Do you guys know what Mike Williams was ranked coming out of high school? A lot of people don't realize this. Ryan, do you know what Mike Williams, who is a freak, by the way?
Pro Bowl receiver
he was,
now. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you know what he was ranked coming out of high school?
1,000? I don't know.
No, I mean, he was ranked higher than that. He was ranked top 2. He was number 201 by ESPN.
Oh, okay.
Number 222 by Rivals. He was the number 37 receiver in the country according to 247 Sports.
37. Wow.
Right. Now, if Notre Dame signed that kid at a receiver, but he's all right. He's not that good of a player. He's not going to move the needle. You won the championship over Bama because you had him in 2016 and didn't have him in 2015.
No doubt.
That's the difference.
Wasn't Travis Etienne wasn't like the craziest recruit of all time either, right? Like he wasn't.
Kind of got a little bit of a bump late. Okay. But when they got a commitment from him, he was a 3-star. Right. And some people had him as a 3-star at the very end. He was the number 222 player in the country coming out of high school on the consensus. So ESPN had him at 114, and that was a late bump. Yeah. 247 had him at 243. Rivals, those geniuses over there, they had him as a 3-star. That was the number 26 running back in the country and the number 16 player in Louisiana.
Nice.
Right? So my point is that you have to build to where the end game is you are on Alabama and Georgia's level. Meaning Georgia gets Nolan Smith, 5-star, and that's who he is. Notre Dame is not going to get that guy. The odds of Notre Dame will get that guy maybe once in a decade. But you know who they're going to get a lot of? Find me the next Isaiah Foskey every year. Find me a Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah every year. At the end of the day, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah was better at linebacker than anybody Alabama had in 2020 and anybody Georgia had in 2020. Would you agree with that, Ryan?
I would. Yep.
But it took them time to get there because you needed to get a lower floor guy. That's how Notre Dame has to recruit, because they're not going to get 18 5-star players. They're just not. Neither did Clemson. They got them at the right positions where they could get those guys. Clemson needed to get some big-time D linemen because their team was built around great D-line play and quarterback play. Notre Dame is not built that same way. They're built around offensive line and quarterback, tight end, and positions like that, linebacker, positions where they are recruiting big-time players consistently when they have the right coach. And so that's my point, is you have to be able to look at it and say, how can we get elite players? Because you need elite players. I have never said, he has never said, you don't need elite players. Like there's some dude I've never heard of on Twitter going at me saying, how Oklahoma doesn't win. You say offense wins championship. Oklahoma doesn't win. Where did I ever say you can suck on defense as long as you have a great offense? Right? If you're going to argue with me, argue what I'm saying. I've never said you don't need elite players. I've only said not every elite player was a 5-star in high school. And you give me the percentages and all. I understand all that. But what I'm saying is Jalen Smith was an elite player for 2 years at Notre Dame. He was a 5-star. Yeah. Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah was an elite player at Notre Dame for 2 years. He was a 3-star. They were both elite players. That's the end game. When you can occasionally get the Jalen Smith, get him. But you're not going to do that year after year after year. So you better darn well make sure you get the Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoahs every year. And that's the key. And then try your hardest to get the Keon Keeley's and guys like that. I'm not saying don't go after them. But Keon Keeley could end up being a star, just like Isaiah Foskey ended up being a star. Because let's not forget, some of you in this chat were not fired up when they got a commitment from Keon Keeley. Why? Because he wasn't ranked very high at the time. Now he's the biggest miss they've had in a decade. You wouldn't have said that if his ranking stayed the same as it was when he committed. Let's be honest about that. And so that's the thing y'all have to understand is we are not saying you don't get stars. We're not saying don't recruit 5-stars if you can get them. Charles Jagusah was a 5-star. Michael Mayer was a 5-star. Kyle Hamilton was a 5-star to me, right? Get them if you can. But just understand that not every elite player in college and the NFL was an elite player in high school. The goal is to find guys who can be big-time college football players, and Notre Dame needs to find elite players. I'm just telling you right now that those elite players a lot of times are not going to be 5-stars all the time.
Well, I mean, even think about the guys that made All-American for Notre Dame's team this past season, right? You had Michael Mayer, who was a 5-star. You have Joe Alt, who was a 3-star. You have Isaiah Foskey that you said didn't rank in the top 200 by anyone.
Nobody ranked him in the top 200. He was he was right outside of it. So I'm not going to act like he was some 3-star. He was like 205, 208.
Sure.
But he's going to be a top 50 draft pick.
Yep.
In a draft that combines 3 classes.
Yes.
That's the thing.
And then Benjamin Morrison makes freshman All-American, and he wasn't ranked incredibly high.
No one even had him in the top 300 except for one person.
Yes.
Right? So, yes, he's going to be a top 50 draft pick as long as he continues to progress, right? That's the whole point, Ryan, is Benjamin Morrison was better than every 5-star corner in America last year, in my opinion. There was not a freshman corner better than him last year, in my view. I don't think so. Jaheim Singletary just entered the portal from Georgia. So who was better off recruiting? Would Notre Dame have been better off recruiting Jaheim Singletary last year or Benjamin Morrison? Well, Benjamin Morrison, right? So now, does that mean you don't try to recruit A.J. Harris? You don't try to recruit Cormani McClain if he's interested? Yeah, go after those guys. Give it a shot. See if they want to come, if they fit what you're doing. And that's the whole thing. That's the whole thing. So did somebody just say C.J. Williams committed to Wisconsin?
That's what someone just said.
See that?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. He did commit to Wisconsin. I'm happy about that, and that's all I'm going to say. So, Ryan, you know my stance on that one. Has that not been my stance all along?
I had
to be somewhat gracious with it. I mean, I'd have been okay if they got him. Like, whatever.
I said the same thing on Tuesday, Brian. I had a lot of backlash. I was like, look, man, if he comes to Notre Dame and it's mutual on both sides, I'll accept it. But, he didn't want to be here. So, what are we going to say about it?
I'm good. You want to go to Wisconsin? Have fun, buddy.
Air raid, baby.
And honestly, for him, it makes a lot of sense to go to Wisconsin. I mean, if we're being real, you come to Notre Dame where you're at best the 4th or 5th best, most talented kid in the room. Or go to Wisconsin where you're the best kid on the roster. Why would you not want to do that? If we're being honest, if it's about him figuring out a way to get on the field and go play, why would he not go to Wisconsin? If we take our Notre Dame fandom away and you're CJ's advisor, what would be a better option for him? Go be the number 1 guy at Wisconsin or go try to find and get room for the other guy? Yeah. That's the thing. So, guys, we have a bunch of questions we got to get to, but I've got some things I got to take care of based on the phone call I just had. Ryan's got to go pick up his daughter, so we're going to have to push this back. So I would really appreciate is you know what I'm going to try to do, Ryan? I think I'm going to screenshot some of these questions that we did not get to, and I'm going to try to answer them tomorrow unless you all bring them up. So I'm going to screenshot these because I feel really bad that we cannot get to all these questions. And because we spent time talking about who would play us in movies. And that makes me feel even worse, even though that was a fun conversation.
It was a great conversation.
But I did screenshot those questions, so we will try to get those tomorrow. And because tomorrow's mailbag, right, Ryan? Tomorrow's the mailbag.
Yes.
So there will be no IB Nation Sports Talk tonight. Ryan and I both have things going on with our families tonight, and Sean Stiers is traveling. So we will not have with the women's basketball team. So we will not have a IB Nation Sports Talk tonight. They will be back tomorrow, however, the rapid fire, and then we'll be back with our mailbag. So we're going to have some Notre Dame's got doing some really interesting recruiting stuff the next couple days on the trail, hitting Chicago. Let's just say Notre Dame is sending 2 of its best recruiters out to Chicago, nice. Including the old ball coach, Marcus Freeman, and he's going to see several players, including a certain 5-star defensive tackle from a prestigious Catholic school in Chicago. So we'll have that on the message board, all the places they're going. So going to be a really exciting weekend, everybody. So make sure that you stay locked in to the boards at boardshourspbreakdown.com. As my guy Sean Paula says, smash the like button, everybody. Thank you, Sean. Hit that like button. Share this podcast. Give us a 5-star review. And just have a great day because we'll be back to you guys again tomorrow. So Ryan, great show today. Thanks for covering for me when I had to jump off on that call. Thanks, everybody, for being with us. Had a ton of fun today. We'll see you all again very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.